Good evening and welcome to the November 26, 2018 meeting of the Auburn Board of Selectmen. First, in accordance with open meeting law, I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded and ask if there's anyone in the audience also making a video or audio recording. Seeing none, could we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item we have on the agenda is public comment, which we have none. Moving on to public hearings and presentations. We have a public hearing for an appeal by Robert Davis Jr. of 14 Preston Avenue of a nuisance dog order by the Board of Health on October 25th, 2018. Could I have a motion to open the hearing, please?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on opening the hearing? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So voted. The purpose of this hearing is for the board to hear the appeal of Robert Davis Jr., 14 Preston Avenue, of the nuisance dog order decision by the Auburn Board of Health on October 25th, 2018. The procedure is as follows. The board will hear from the dog owner that filed the appeal. The board will then hear from representatives of the town that have been involved in this matter. The board will hear from residents of the town and other witnesses involved. Board members will ask questions of town officials and/or the dog owners. The board will then either continue or close the hearing and make a decision to grant or not grant the appeal. Anyone who is expected to give testimony tonight will be sworn in, so I'll ask anyone who will be involved in this hearing and give testimony to please stand to be sworn in. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Davis, you filed the appeal, so I'll ask you to go first. You can go up to the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Robert Davis. I'm a property owner, homeowner here in town, a business owner here in town, and I am the owner of the dog. I have some questions. I'm not really familiar with the procedure here. I have some questions regarding how we came to the all set. I have some questions regarding how we came to the conclusion that this was actually my dog, and where and how we've come to the conclusion of what the dog, what has been ordered for me to do with the dogs.
Okay. Okay.
Am I allowed to ask questions?
When we get to the portion of after people give testimony, you can ask a limited number of questions to the town officials who made the report.
That's who I want.
Okay, and all questions will go through me.
Okay.
So you're here to request an appeal of the decision that was made that you denied. Are you denying that it was your dog?
I am denying that it's my dog.
Okay. All righty, you can have a seat for right now. The Board of Selectmen has some paperwork they need to review, so we are now going to receive packets regarding the previous hearing. If you'll bear with us in accordance with the process of the hearing, we're just receiving this information, and I ask your indulgence for us to review it for a few minutes.
There you go.
When you're done.
Here.
Dan, you're all set, correct? You're all set?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just waiting for, no worries, Tristan, whenever you're ready. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We certainly want to conduct a fair and open appeal process. Members received this information once the hearing opened, so we are ready to move on. So we will now hear from officials, representatives of the town. We have Mrs. Darlene Coyle and Ms. Amy Contois, who are going to speak on behalf of the town.
Thank you, members of the board.
And if I can just ask you to keep your voice up, because we have people sitting in the back as well who are participating in the hearing.
Darlene Coyle, Director of Development and Inspectional Services and Director of Public Health. So we are here for the appeal. Back in, just to give you a little history, back in February, the town had received a petition for a complaint for nuisance dogs from people in the neighborhood on, in the Preston Ave, Elmwood Street area neighborhood. In accordance with that complaint, there were three concerns that were identified in the complaint, and I believe you have this in your packet, but I just wanted to identify as part of the three concerns. One of the concerns was some interruption of mail service. So that was something that the board noted in the complaint. So as part of Mass General Law, Chapter 140, Section 157, pertaining to nuisance and dangerous dogs, and any of the orders for remedial action, appeal process in violation of orders, the Board of Health scheduled a nuisance dog hearing in response to this complaint that the town received. So the Board of Health had scheduled a hearing, a public hearing, and that took place on April 5th. On April 5th, there was a presentation of the situation. So we reviewed the complaint that the board had received, and at that time, there were several people that were present to express their concerns for what was happening in the neighborhood and pertaining to these dogs that were owned by Mr. Davis at 14 Preston Street. Also, at that time, the animal control officer, Amy Contois, had also presented facts regarding some of the complaints that she had received and how those were affecting the neighborhood and what was going on in the neighborhood. I know as part of the investigation, she had contacted the postmaster to find out a little bit more about the mail service and a bite that had occurred, so she can provide detail on that. But as part of the interruption of mail service and concerns from the neighbors for dogs getting loose, excessive barking, and so forth, the board had discussed what was going on Mr. Davis had also attended the meeting at that time, and there was dialogue between the neighbors and Mr. Davis with the board to answer questions back and forth about what was going on. There were some behaviors that were going on with the dogs that the board identified as concerns, and we also heard from Ms. Contois about some of these behaviors. Many options were discussed at that time about what the definition of a nuisance dog is, and if I can just let you know, in accordance with Chapter 140, Section 136A, the definition of nuisance dog is a dog that, number one, by excessive barking or other disturbance, is a source of annoyance to a sick person residing in the vicinity, or two, by excessive barking, causing damage, or other interference, a reasonable person would find such behavior disruptive to one's quiet and peaceful enjoyment, or three, has threatened or attacked livestock, a domestic animal, or a person, but such threat or attack was not grossly disproportionate reaction under all the circumstances. So the definition is what the board had to look at to determine whether or not these dogs were deemed nuisance, which ultimately they did. They felt that with hearing all of the facts of the case, they felt that there was, under the definition number two, that there was disruptive, something disruptive to somebody's quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their property by what the dogs were displaying. So at that time, the board had determined that both dogs were nuisance dogs, and they put a restriction into place to try to remedy the situation. And that restriction basically was to construct an outdoor pen that was a secure pen in accordance with the definition in the Mass General Law of what the specific requirements of how tall the pen has to be, the strength of gauge of fencing, and how far it has to go into the ground. That determination was made, and Mr. Davis did comply with that order. There was some discussion with the board for extending some time to be able to provide the homeowner time to get that pen constructed, obviously due to the cost and so forth. So that did happen, and he did comply with the order. That was back in April that determination was made. After April, there were complaints that the town was receiving still from neighbors in the area regarding the dogs barking excessively and causing disturbances. Ms. Contois did field those complaints and tried several times to try to see if any of those complaints were verified. She was not able to verify that there was a noncompliance with the bylaw. The barking restriction in the bylaw is very specific on how long the barking has to last. Continuous barking for 15 minutes or more. So she was not able to verify any of those. However, in October, we received several concerns for dogs from 14 Preston Street being loose in the neighborhood, and that was relayed to animal control. Animal control brought that information to the Board of Health and requested a hearing, public hearing, to hear those complaints. On October 25th, there was a public hearing, again, by the Board of Health with Mr. Davis for 14 Preston Ave for the 2 dogs that he owns. And again, several neighbors came to the meeting, expressed their concerns about what they had seen with these dogs getting loose in the neighborhood, barking, behaviors that were making people fearful. There's a large concern from the neighbors and from the people that attended the meeting that these dogs are very concerning to them, and people are worried about their health and safety. So the board, again, discussed at length these concerns, allowed the chance for people to speak at the meeting, and Mr. Davis was also in attendance at that meeting, and the board determined that these concerns were valid. Again, animal control, Ms. Contois, went through what she had received and the concerns that had been identified, and she also offered recommendations to the board about further restrictions on placing what the original order from April 5th. There was an order made with the pen to be constructed outdoors, and then these restrictions were in addition to that. A number of them, I know you have them in your packet, and those ultimately were put into place. I'm not going to go through them. I know you have them in front of you under the order from October 29th, 2018. And so that order was put in place. An order was sent to Mr. Davis, and further, we received written letters from concerned residents regarding the dogs. So as part of the process and as part of our bylaws, any appeal that is going to come from a dog hearing through the Board of Health, the process for that appeal is through the Board of Selectmen. What you have before you is obviously an appeal by Mr. Davis. Both Ms. Contois and myself had spoken with Mr. Davis after the October meeting regarding some of his concerns. I know he had expressed that he did not feel that he had a chance to speak at that meeting. There was opportunity to offer anybody at that public hearing to speak. Mr. Davis did not choose to speak at that meeting until the hearing was actually closed. So the appeal process was explained to him, and obviously you have the appeal request from him. What you have before you is the choice to deny the appeal and uphold the Board of Health order, or grant the appeal, which would then nullify the Board of Health order as it's written in the October 29th, 2018 order from the October 25th hearing. We certainly are here to answer any questions that you may have. There's a lot of information in your packets and a lot of details that we can offer for you. But again, there has been a public process, 2 public meetings on this. There's been well-attended meetings and a lot of expressed opinions and concerns made to the town. But through the legal process, the board has taken appropriate action. They have heard it through a public process. They've made a decision. They've provided that written decision to the owner, and as we're here today, certainly we can answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Excuse me, before I let Ms. Contoy speak, just for the record, we have a representative of the Telegram who's making an audio recording. Did you want to add anything at this time?
At this time, I don't think there's anything that
Okay.
I need to add to Ms. Coyle's information, but certainly when we get to the process, if there's any questions regarding the specifics of these meetings, of the investigations done by animal control, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Preston, you indicated that you had some questions. Do you want to ask, and do you want to address your questions at this time? I'm sorry, Mr. Davis from Preston Street. Okay, if you can come up to the microphone, please. You can ask your questions through me, and if appropriate, then we will have the town representatives answer those questions.
Please forgive me, I'm not really familiar with the procedure here, but I did have some questions regarding the veracity of the claims that it's my dog. I did request the minutes of the meeting and the picture of the dog that was presented to the board at the time. I noticed that there was no date and time stamp on the picture, and frankly, I can't with any certainty even determine whether the dog's a male or a female in the picture. Not even the fact that it's my dog, but I can't tell whether it's a male or a female in it. I had some questions for
We're gonna-
animal control.
I'll just stop you right there. Are you familiar with the photo that is being referenced? Are you familiar with the photo that he's asking about?
I am.
Was that presented at the October hearing or the April hearing?
It was presented at the October
At the
hearing.
October hearing. And how did you come into possession of that photo?
The photo was presented as part of an anonymous complaint of a violation of the order that was issued back in April. It shows what I have identified as a Rottweiler-type dog. It has the same markings as a Rottweiler has in a neighbor's property. We did have a neighbor in attendance at the October 25th meeting that did, again, sworn under oath, state that he saw that dog on his property on October 11th and took the picture of the dog on October 11th on his property.
Okay, thank you. You can go on to your next.
Excuse me, did she say this was part of an anonymous complaint back in April, part of a package?
No, she said it was October, at the October hearing.
Okay.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, I have a couple more questions.
Please go ahead.
Was there an investigation conducted by Animal Control regarding this accusation or allegation?
Are you talking about the specific allegation of that?
Specific allegation of the dog being loose
You
in
have to,
somebody's yard?
we can't talk
on-
over each other, so let me finish my question. Are you asking specifically about the photo that you just referenced, or the investigation as a whole?
I'm asking about the investigation into the allegation of the dog being loose on somebody's property on the date in question in conjunction with the picture.
Ms. Contois, did you investigate an alleged incident on October 11th with the dog being loose?
Yes, at the time that the complaint was received, the dogs were no longer, the dog was no longer loose in the neighborhood. The report was received after the dog had already been contained, and part of the investigation process did involve requesting the hearing with the Board of Health, as it was a potential violation of a Board of Health order. So at that time, it would allow the owner and the parties making the report to both have a chance to speak at the meeting.
Did you have any additional questions?
Yes, I do. So, there was the way I understand it, there was one complaint made on the 11th and another one made on the 12th by somebody else. Was That verified, did the people who are claiming that my dog was loose on the 12th and on the 11th and reported on the 12th, did they actually see my dog loose?
Are you familiar with the complaint on the 12th?
Yes, I am.
Okay, could you give us the details of that?
Sure. The complaint that I received on the 12th of October identified a situation on October 11th where a resident in the neighborhood saw a Rottweiler loose, unrestrained on Mr. Davis's property, and then saw the dog enter the back portion of the property and disappear behind a tree line. That's consistent with the report that we received on October 11th, that a resident had the dog on their property that day.
Did you have any additional questions?
That didn't answer the question I had. I had asked, there was 2 separate complaints. One, somebody claimed on the 11th, and one that somebody called in on the 12th. 2 separate complaints. Now, I had asked if both people had claimed that they saw the dog. I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing, and she's speaking towards you, I can't really understand.
Okay. Amy, could you please pull down your microphone and just clarify that answer, please?
Yeah. To clarify your question, we received a report, 2 complaints on October 11th and October 12th, both relating to an incident on October 11th. So October 11th, we received a report that the dog was loose in on somebody's property. On October 12th, the reporting party reported that on the previous day, they saw the dog loose.
Do you have any additional questions?
Yes, I have a question. Can anybody, with any degree of certainty, tell me that the dog in question is my dog? Because I know for a fact I put the dog in myself at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I took the dog out of the pen at 5:30 that night, and my wife was home all day. The dog was never out of the pen. So I don't know how they can say that this is my dog loose.
Ms. Contois, are you confident in the testimony that you gave that it was this owner's dog who was loose on the 11th?
I am confident, based on the picture that we received that shows a Rottweiler-type dog in a directly abutting property. The fact that we had 2 witnesses come forward that identified the dogs as belonging to Mr. Davis that are generally familiar with his dogs, being neighbors in that neighborhood. And also, I would like to point out that we did pull the licensing records for the dogs in town, and we don't have any other Rottweilers or Rottweiler-type dogs in that specific area of town.
Do you have any other questions?
Not at this time.
Is there anyone else from the home who wants to testify first?
I'm sorry?
Is there anyone from that address who wants to testify before I open it up to neighbors? If you could please give your name and address for the record.
I'm Angela Chacon. I work at home, so I'm home with the dogs all day. I live at the address. I can't open those pens to get the dogs out, and I have expressed to Bob that that is a concern. I grew up with earthquakes. If there's an earthquake, I can't get the dogs out of the pen. So if they were out, it meant that somebody who was strong enough to get the pole that it takes to open it up, let them out, and then put them back in the pen before he got home or before I went out to check their water, which is every 2 hours. I also have the dogs on a baby monitor, and I can see, and it shows up on the big TV in the living room. So no matter where I'm at in the house, I can see what they're up to all the time. I didn't see the pen open. And the other thing about the dangerousness, we have a quadriplegic cat that can't get out of her own way. If they were that dangerous, I don't think that cat would survive. And the fact that they're very gentle with her, they are twin boys that are just short of the age of calming down. They're almost 2. I separate them as much as I can, and that seems to do well. But it's no different than having two kids with their own mind and their own free will. They've been really good about listening and not running off for me, not trying to escape out the door or anything else. But if they were out, it does seem a little odd that they got back into the pen. And it doesn't seem that anybody can really open it easily. Bob has to get a bar to open that pen to let them out. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. You can be seated. I'm now going to open it up to public comment. Please wait till I recognize you. Come up to the microphone and give your name and address for the record, please. Does anyone want to speak? Please come up to the microphone.
My name is David Legg. I live at 33 Field Street. There's one house between our home and the address where the dogs live. We also own a vacant lot adjacent to that lot. So when people were describing the dog disappearing into the tree line, the chances are good that that was onto my property. Although not in a place where it necessarily be easy to see because that area is somewhat wooded. But what we have not had an opportunity to relay to the people in the town and others as to what my wife had observed. She had not come forward earlier, partly because of concern. But knowing that there's some degree to which the observations of the people in the neighborhood have been questioned. My wife has just today texted me during this meeting. She's away watching our grandson. And what she reports is approximately a year ago, so it was before the February hearing. She was in her car in the neighborhood, and she observed, and again, this is a whole year ago, she observed one of the dogs leap the porch, so jump off the porch when they were restrained on a leash on the porch, leap the porch and chase a young boy all the way down the parallel street. I believe it's Newton. And that boy was very fast, and the dog is very fast. And fortunately, that young boy was able to make it into his home and escape the dog that was pursuing him. In my own experience, when I walk down the hill, and walking in the neighborhood is good for our health, when I walk down the hill, such as to go to Southbridge Street to do an errand, like to go to the bank or something like that, save a little bit of fuel and avoid a little congestion, also avoid the relatively dangerous intersection in my car, it's easier to walk around it. When I walk past the front of the house and come into view of these dogs, they bark with a frightening, aggressive bark. They leap high within those cages. Those dogs, I'm not sure how much they weigh, but they're already extremely powerful animals. Mr. Davis or any one of us would have a difficult time constraining those dogs. And by the way, I want to add, I am not afraid of dogs. I go into people's homes. I have been going to people's homes for my work since I was 13 years old as a newspaper carrier. And I like dogs, but they are indeed very frightening. You make that step and you hear the dogs bark, even though you know they live there, it still sends frightening chills up and down your spine and discourages you from walking. My concern, based on what my wife observed with this young boy being pursued like that, somebody who's far faster than most of us are in the neighborhood and had a head start, that if the dogs were to get out at the wrong time, someone or someone's animal could be, seriously hurt. I would find it helpful to have professional testimony about how much these dogs weigh and what Rottweilers were originally bred to do, regardless of how the dogs might be gentle towards the cat that lives in the house. They may draw on their instincts and act on how they've been bred by human beings to behave and wind up causing some real damage. And that's why we've planned to come forward, even though of concern that other people have been anonymous in their coming forward based on concern from what my wife saw for the safety of people in the neighborhood. She today agreed to have our names used as a witness to what we had seen.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Lake.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Anyone else? Anyone else want to say anything? Please come up to the microphone.
Good evening, Al Rafferty, 18 Paul Street. Good evening, Madam Selectman. The day that the Board of Health hearing was held, I was waiting for another meeting to occur, so I sat in on the Board of Health meeting to see what kind of things were going on. And so I was a witness to what took place at the Board of Health meeting. Didn't think nothing of it until I was mailed a letter saying that I had signed in and therefore I was a witness and would I be interested in coming by. So here I am. To refresh my memory, I decided to go online to the cable station website to see if I could rewatch the meeting. And unfortunately, the meeting wasn't posted, which was unusual because just about every meeting that is filmed is posted. And I know it was filmed because there was a lady operating the controls in the room, but for some reason, the meeting wasn't posted. So I have to rely on my memory. And notwithstanding the issue of what the dog did, I leave that for you to determine. The one thing that shocked me at the meeting, there was two things that shocked me at the meeting. How it was conducted and one of the recommendations that the Board of Health made. First of all, the Board of Health had recommended that the male dog be neutered, castrated essentially. And so I asked the question, why are you recommending that? I thought that was a bit harsh. And I was told by one of the Board of Health members that according to studies, it reduced dog aggression. Okay. So I says, oh, okay, that's interesting. I did go online because, I have animals and I wanted to see if this was true. And I ran into some studies that were conducted in Europe, in Sweden. And apparently the conclusion overwhelmingly in all studies were that it causes more aggression and not less. So I was just wondering why there's a difference of opinion. Apparently I think in America we think it's good, and in Europe they don't think it's so good. And the second thing that shocked me, and notwithstanding, like I said, that you have aggrieved, Madam Chairman, you have aggrieved neighbors here, but notwithstanding what the dog did and what you should do about it, my impression was that he really didn't get full due process at the meeting. If a copy of the meeting was posted, you could have looked that over. But I've been to a lot of meetings, and what happened was Mr. Davis was asked if he wanted to say anything, and he's the subject of the meeting, and he says, I'll reserve my comments until other people have spoken. And the chairman of that meeting kept asking, is there anyone in the audience who would like to say anything? And some of the neighbors said something, and then he repeated, is there anyone else in the audience who would like to say something? And it was obvious to me that Mr. Davis didn't know how the meetings were run and what his rights were. And suddenly the board made their decision, and then Mr. Davis says, wait, I don't get to say anything? And they says, well, we asked you, and you didn't say anything, so the meeting's over. Have a nice day. I thought that was unusual, because when you have somebody who is at a hearing like that, if he complains that he wasn't given the right to speak, it would have been very simple to just reopen the meeting briefly, okay, to give him something to say. Instead, they just basically slammed it shut and went on their way, and here we are tonight, which I think is really a waste of all our time, quite frankly, when it could have been handled at that meeting. So I really didn't think he got due process. Regardless of what you think of the dog, everyone is entitled to due process. The rule of law is very important in this country. But he was obviously confused, and tonight we realize he's also hard of hearing. And it could very well be Mr. Davis didn't admit that he couldn't hear what was taking place. Perhaps he was just a little on the shy side, like he was tonight. And so my only thing is take into consideration, number one, perhaps he didn't get due process. We don't have a video record because who knows where it is. And two, there are studies that say castrating a dog doesn't necessarily lead to less aggression. So, and I know the Board of Health said the only two things you can do tonight are, one, sustain the decision of the board, or two, overturn it. I'm wondering if there's a third choice, can you amend it? And perhaps be a little bit less harsh on the animal in question. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Before you step away, if I could ask you a question? Was you referenced it, I assume the meeting you're talking about is the October 25th hearing, not the April hearing?
Yes.
Okay. And when did you look to see if the information was online?
After I got the letter, which was recent, and I checked again today to see if it was online, and it's not there.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes.
I just would like to identify that I did actually watch the meeting earlier today. The October 25th meeting is posted to ACTV Auburn, the YouTube channel. I watched it just about an hour ago, and I have watched the recording of the meeting several times since the October 25th meeting. It was posted shortly after the meeting occurred.
And when I spoke, I would have echoed that. So, thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wants to speak? Please, come up.
I just wanted to speak based on that.
Okay, just wait till you get up to the microphone so everyone can hear you.
On the YouTube video,
Yeah.
I myself looked for it and was unable to find it until late today. I did manage to get it on about 5 o'clock tonight.
Okay.
But prior to that, it wasn't there, and I checked every day for the last week.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Please give your name and address for the record.
My name is Timothy Walsh. I live in Quincy, but Bob is my dad, and I have lived at this house before on and off. I just wanted to say I understand any neighbors' views on the dog, like someone saying earlier, the barking is ferocious, and I completely understand that, but I just wanted to put out there, like the last gentleman said, you don't always want to judge a dog by that, because I own a blue-nosed pit bull, and he's really big, and he even looks aggressive to like sight, and the sound to him is also aggressive. And if you were to approach my house, you may think he was mean, but if you looked at my Facebook and looked at the number of pictures of him with my almost 2-year-old son, you'd realize different. And if you ever near my dad's on Saturdays when I bring my son out there, you'd also realize different, because they didn't know my son because they were both born around the same time, and I never lived in my dad's while I've had my kid, so you wouldn't see it. But it's just, you know, it's a dog's nature to bark, so I understand people's view on it, and also, like the gentleman before said, I have not neutered my dog on beliefs that, I think it sometimes hurts him. It's not a way to solve the problem. I think my dad's fence was actually pretty awesome if you come look at it, especially for a dog pen. But yeah, that's really it.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? Please come up to the microphone, name and address for the record.
Jeremy Harris, 21 Elmwood Street. There was one day I opened up my basement door and came face to face with one of his dogs, and that was after the meetings and stuff like that. They were supposed to be in the pen. What kind of floor does that pen have? Is it a dirt floor? Can they dig out of it?
We have to.
It's not a dirt floor?
Excuse me, we can't do questions
So-
back and forth. If you have any questions, I'll make note of them and
I
ask.
came face to face with the dog. A screen door and was the only thing standing between us. The only thing that scared him away is that I grabbed the pipe and hit the side of my house, the foundation, and the loud noise scared him, and I got pictures of it, time and date. And the time was about between 5:15, 5:23, around that area.
Is that PM?
PM, yes. And then we made the complaint like we were told to. At the next meeting, the following meeting, I believe it was the 25th, the last meeting we had, he had plenty of due process. I mean, where was my due process when the dog was getting ready to attack me? I didn't have one. So something needs to be done. It's constant barking. I get out of my car home from work, they bark. I work out in my yard, they bark. They bounce off the fence. I mean, they're uncontrollable dogs. I'm a dog lover. I love dogs. I have no problems with them. There's no such thing as a bad dog, but there's a such thing as a bad dog owner, and he's one of them. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that.
Could you please come up to the microphone?
I have made every attempt to be a responsible pet owner, dog owner. I was the one that suggested to put up the chain link dog runs. I constructed them myself. I made sure that they were very strong, that the fence is buried so they can't dig underneath, that they're lockable, that they have a dog house. I train them. I walk them every day. Okay? I don't train my dogs to be vicious. They are very protective for my property, and they're supposed to be. They're there specifically for the protection of my property. They're not supposed to be friendly, all right? Not to my neighbors, not to anybody else other than family, and anybody who has been socialized with them. I have had other people here, other people come up and get to know the dogs, and the dogs don't bother them. They'll bark briefly, they go back to what they're doing. They don't bark insistently, and since the last meeting, I've taken measures to reduce and almost eliminate the barking by incorporating static bark collars and not the little cheap ones. We're talking of a nuisance dog grade that will give them an ample shock to stop them from barking. And they have worked wonderfully. I continue to do everything I can to train these dogs to reduce their barking. I'm here to appeal the decision of the Board of Health because I am a responsible pet owner, and I don't believe that some of the conditions that some of the recommendations that were made are proper. I have a study. I'd like to ask Animal Control what study she's quoting that says that neutering the dog is going to, because I have studies that I'll be happy to give you right now that says it does just the opposite. Okay? I agree with putting a chip in the dog. I would like to know where if my dog gets away, all right, what he's responsible for. I'll be happy to put a chip in the dog, but I don't want to cut his balls off, either one of them. There's nothing that says that that's ever going to change their aggressive behavior. I bought these dogs, they're purebreds. I bought them for breeding purposes, and that pretty much defeats the purpose of breeding, for the breeding purposes. I'm hoping that we can look at this rationally. I'm not going to say that I was denied due process. I had a chance to look at it. Obviously, I didn't understand what was going on at the last one. That's why I'm here before you now. I hope you don't feel that this is a waste of your time, all right? These are serious allegations with serious consequences, all right? My dogs are going to suffer the end results if things aren't changed. I've done everything I can to work with everybody to help resolve these issues, and I'm more than happy to continue to help to try to resolve these issues. All right? I just don't feel that some of these conditions and these recommendations that have been handed down to me that I have to do with these dogs are fair. That's all I have to say.
And Mr. Davis, if you have a report that you would like to make part of the record, you're welcome to hand it up here, and we'll make it part of the record. This is a report about neutering of animals?
Yes.
Okay. You can hand it to Ms. Contois, and she'll hand them down to us. Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak? Please come up to the microphone. Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, I'm Lisa St. John. I live at 25 Elmwood Street. My first thought that just came up tonight was the dogs go out at 5:30 in the morning or 6 in the morning and they don't come in until 5:30. They're two Rottweilers. What do they weigh, 120 pounds in a cage that's this big with a dog bed in it, a dog house? It's no wonder they bark all the time. And I don't know about these shock collars, but if they put them on an hour ago, well, then that's why I haven't heard them bark. But otherwise, they bark incessantly. And aside from having them surgically altered, and I don't know the benefits or not of that, but one of the proposals was to just cover the fences on 3 sides so that they can't see me coming home with groceries, me coming home from work. They bark, and they do it all the time, yet it still startles me. And they jump high enough on that fence, and all their weight, it sounds like they're coming at you. So I get that they're protection dogs. I have dogs, they're not protection dogs. My dogs love everybody, and they don't go outside and they don't bark. They go outside when I'm home, and that's it. But I don't want to see a dog altered unnecessarily. If the studies say that it's not going to help, then it's not going to help. Okay, that's fine. But the barking from early in the morning on weekends till all hours of the night is just, it drives you insane. And I don't know the bylaws of 15 minutes solid barking, because a dog would run out of breath in 15 minutes if it solidly barked. But being out there all those hours, it explains why there is so much barking. And they are protective dogs, so they're going to bark at anything that goes by. Like, what happened to that drape, the gate thing, the pen on 3 sides, so that it only sees the owners in the owner's house? That would be fine. A shock collar seems excessive. I don't think that was in the laws for him to have to get that. I wouldn't put that on my own dogs. But just recently, my sister came to visit on Saturday. She has a new hip. The dog scared her so much she jarred herself, and I had to help her. She's like, those effing dogs scare the hell out of me every time I come. I'm like, I know, we have another meeting about it. Like, I can't tell how many emails I've sent about the barking. Like, what can we do? The biggest thing for us in my house is the barking. And they are vicious, but if they don't, I didn't see the dog out, but I saw the photo that day, and I got scared. I don't want that dog taking one of my little dogs away, because it doesn't know my dog. Great, it knows the cat. It doesn't know me. It doesn't know my dog. And they are very vicious, and they're huge. And they're not playful Rottweilers like I've seen. I've been around playful, loving Rottweilers and who didn't know me, and these are not them. But the biggest thing is, let's block them from seeing every little thing that they bark at all day long. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak? Please come up to the microphone, name and address for the record.
Victor Bowen, 25 Elmwood Street. Just to reiterate on the first part, as far as the video, it's been online since the meeting, almost. So it's up there, everybody can see it. I agree, especially with, surrounding the cage on 3 sides at least. I mean, after the last meeting, he had the opportunity, could have been a good faith gesture to surround the area to reduce the barking. He didn't want to do that. He figured, let's give him another 30 days to bark incessantly and annoy people. He keeps saying he's trying to work with everybody. I mean, that would have been a perfect thing to do. Surround the cage, show some good faith, and we can go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to that.
You can go up to the microphone, please.
As for working in good faith, I went and got the bark collars, all right? The dogs can still see through slats, and I do plan on taking remedial measures to reduce their view out of the cage. I have no problem with doing that. I just haven't had a chance to do it. What I was able to do was to go get bark collars and try to train them to stop the barking without having, because they're still going to see through the slats. And if I don't do something to help control the barking before the slats go on, they're going to continue to bark. They'll see any motion through the slats, and they're going to continue to bark. So I am making every effort I can with what I've got to work with, okay? I'm not in disagreement with some of the suggestions that the Board of Health has made, all right? I'm willing to work with people to try to alleviate the situation. I don't want my neighbors to have to suffer and deal with docking. The dogs barking bother me enough to go out and bring them in so that they'll stop on occasion myself, okay? I'm doing what I can to stop them from barking. I could have put slats up 30 days ago, but without the bark collars, then it's not going to stop them. Okay? That's about it. I am making efforts.
Okay, you may have stated this already. When did you get the bark collars? How long have?
2 weeks ago?
2 weeks you've been using them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to speak? Please come up to the microphone.
Me again. Victor Bowen, 25 Elmwood Street. So he said he got the dogs for breeding purposes. So question number 1, is he a licensed breeder? He's also mentioned that he's training the dogs. Is he trained? Is he a trainer? That would be my next question. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? I'm now going to open it up to the Board of Selectmen members for questions. I'm going to start. I have lots of notes here. Lots of questions for Amy. Have you observed these dogs personally?
I have personally observed the dogs and on a limited basis interacted them when I did have to issue a quarantine and invest a bite that happened in October of 2017 when one of the dogs bit a mail carrier as the mail carrier was reaching over the railing of the porch.
And can you give us your overall impression of the dogs?
At that time, there were 2 large breed, strong-looking dogs. They were very reactive. They were reactive to my presence on the property. They were reactive to one another. So if they weren't barking at me and they were barking at something else going on in the neighborhood, if one dog got too excited, the other dog would redirect that aggression onto the other dog. They're dogs that I can understand the concerns of the neighborhood. At this time, they haven't exhibited any behavior that by law we can identify them as dangerous dogs. We can't identify a dog as dangerous based on barking and growling alone. Certainly some of the additional behaviors that were mentioned tonight were not presented to us before the hearing, such as the dog potentially chasing a young boy down the street. That's certainly an alarming behavior, but again, not something that we were aware of and had the chance to investigate. But they are large dogs. Mr. Davis has complied with the original order that was issued in April to construct an enclosure on the property. However, it is concerning if these dogs are still potentially getting loose. Mr. Davis has identified in the previous meetings that they're difficult dogs to train, that he has a difficult time controlling them, and because of that, it's concerning having a dog that is unsocialized. As Mr. Davis stated, they're not meant to be friendly with neighbors or friendly with anybody that they're not familiar with, and that would be concerning to have that dog loose in town and in the neighborhoods of that area.
And much has been said about this study regarding neutering the animals. Could you address that, please?
Sure. From what I briefly saw of what Mr. Davis handed in, it did appear to be an article that I'm assuming can be found online. I didn't see a specific study that it referenced. I do have information from a study performed by UC Davis. They have a veterinary medicine school as part of the University of California at Davis. And in that study that was performed, 100% of the dogs were found to have a reduction in some behaviors that are being described by the neighborhood, such as roaming behaviors. And again, neutering the animals wouldn't be a catch-all to the issues happening, but it has been proven to reduce some of the behaviors. Again, in that study, there was a 100% decrease in roaming activity, and there was a less significant but still reduction in aggression towards canine and human family members, and also unfamiliar dogs and territorial intruders in the dog's home area. With regards to neutering and the medical and scientific information behind that, neutering by removing the testes of the animal does reduce the testosterone, and by reducing the hormone, you're reducing the likelihood of some of those hormone-related behaviors. Ones that you typically see in an intact male dog are urine marking, roaming, and aggression. Aggression can be a very wide range. And I would also like to point out that Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 140, Section 157, has recognized neutering, altering, so neutering or spaying a dog can potentially reduce aggressive or dangerous behaviors, and it does then limit the reproductive ability of a dangerous or potentially aggressive animal, because there's a big concern of passing those genes on to then create more aggressive and dangerous dogs.
Thank you. And when Mr. Davis first spoke at the start of the hearing, he denied that they were his dogs who, that were out, that were referenced at the October 25th meeting. Did he deny at either the April or the October 25th meeting that they were his dogs when the issue came up?
Mm-hmm. So that issue came up at the October 25th meeting. The picture of the dog loose on a property in the neighborhood was presented to the board as part of the packet. Nobody in the audience at that time, including Mr. Davis, requested to see that picture. He did request to see the picture after, through a public records request, when he was given that.
Okay. I'll probably have more questions, but I'm going to open it up to other members right now. Mr. Holstrom.
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming in tonight. This is, any hearing like this is kind of interesting because there are the back and forth, but it, I guess my first question is that after the first hearing, how long was it before they put in the actual kennel in the back of the house that they were recommended to put in? Mm-hmm. Without the runners, when was the actual kennel put in?
Through the order issued by the Board of Health, Mr. Davis was allowed just about 90 days to construct that kennel. So the board did ask that the kennel be constructed by June 30th, and he did comply within that time frame.
Okay. Has there been any other time that you know of that these dogs were not in the kennel and were on these runs after the kennel was put in?
So in accordance with the order by the Board of Health, the dogs were allowed while an owner was present, so attending the dogs outside. It was allowed for the dogs to be attached to a runner or a leash, and it was only when an owner was not present that the dogs would have to be confined to the dog kennel.
Well, I guess my next question is, just from some of the testimony I've heard tonight, that the dogs can be uncontrollable by individuals that aren't strong enough to maintain them. If the dogs are getting out and the kennel had been put up, then how are the dogs getting out and intimidating the neighborhood and what's happening? It sounds like the owner is out every 2 hours to watch. I guess my next question is there a microchip? Has the microchips been installed in the dogs?
As far as I'm aware, the dogs have not been microchipped.
Okay, because my other question would be, then in a question of whether it's his dogs or not, those microchips should be recording or be able to have some kind of a GPS in them to let them know where the dogs have been and how they've been. That's my question, is how they're getting out, because it didn't sound like, you know, the owner could open the gate and can't control the dogs, so she doesn't do that, but she can't control the dogs to bring them into the house to stop the barking either. Has this been an ongoing complaint, the excessive barking? And has it been all times of the day, all times of night? Is it specific times?
Sure. Sorry, I'll try to
I'm sorry.
address each point. So in regards to the barking, we did receive barking complaints prior to the construction of the dog enclosure on the property when the dogs were formerly kept on the front porch. And we have continued to receive complaints while the dogs have been placed outside in the outdoor kennel. As Ms. Coyle stated earlier, I have gone out to attempt to investigate those complaints. I have not personally witnessed, so I have to consider the barking complaints at this time to be unfounded. However, I'm not living in the neighborhood, and I'm not there at various points during the day. I did request that if it's an ongoing issue, that neighbors record the times when the barking starts, when it stops, to then hand that in as testimony for what they're seeing, because otherwise, they're in the neighborhood, they're hearing things much more frequently than we can ever go out there for. In regards to the microchip, a microchip, the way it works, it's not and can't be used as a GPS tracking device. What it is, it's a small implantation about the size of a grain of rice that's implanted under the skin. It has a specific radio frequency specific to that microchip, so that way it's a permanent identification for the animal. No other animal will have that specific radio frequency number, so that if any dog or cat or animal that's microchipped is picked up, we do have a scanner equipped through animal control where we can scan the animal and it will pick up that radio frequency. So then we can say without a doubt and with absolute certainty that that is an animal that we have a recorded microchip number for.
Okay. And I guess one more item here. The dogs are trained for protection. Has the Board of Health or you as a dog officer ever recommended to have these dogs trained professionally, or can you help me with that?
As part of the latest order by the Board of Health that was discussed at the October 25th meeting, one of the recommendations of amendment to the previous order was that Mr. Davis seek professional training from either a certified dog trainer, a veterinary behaviorist, or a certified behaviorist. Mr. Davis has not identified exactly how he has trained these dogs to protect anybody. And again, he has stated that he has difficulty in training the dogs and controlling them. So it is something that I personally feel strongly about, that if he's having difficulties with 2 large breed strong dogs, that he should be seeking professional help in that regard.
So you don't believe the dogs have been trained professionally?
From information that I've received from the owner, as far as I'm aware, the dogs have not received any professional training.
Thank you.
Mr. Carpenter?
Madam Chair, before I start, Mrs. Catroni, is it, had her hand up before we went to board questions, so I don't know if she'd like to speak before
Was
I go
there,
to questions.
was there someone I missed that had their hand up? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. Please come up.
I didn't swear on the oath.
Okay, I'll stand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Kathy Sivert. I live at 13 Preston Ave, directly across the street from their house. And I do have a photo taken on October 12th showing the dog sitting right on their back stair without him standing, watching the dog, if anybody wants to see that picture.
I'll let you look
Was
at it,
that part of
Amy,
it,
so
that he had to be outside with his dog?
You can give her back the phone and then testify to it after.
Yep.
Thank you. Did you have anything else?
I mean, I hear the excessive barking every day. I come out to get my car, they're barking. I'm out walking my dog, they're barking. And I don't know what else to do about it, just to listen to it, you know?
Thank you.
Can I respond to that, please?
In just a moment, I have, Mr. Carpenter is up next for his questions.
I have quite a few, Madam Chair. so
Please go ahead.
I just beg your indulgence. So
Absolutely.
I did watch both hearings. They were available online. So in preparation for this meeting, there was outstanding fines. I believe the quote was $125. Have they been satisfied?
The citations have been paid since the last meeting.
Okay. The second question I had, watching the October 11th meeting, there was no mention of further complaints other than the October 11th and 12th complaints that you received, but tonight you said that there were others, and you've investigated them. So my question is, why wasn't that at the hearing on the 25th with the Board of Health?
I do believe that the barking was brought up at the October 25th hearing. However, that those barking complaints, like I stated, I wasn't able to find evidence personally that supported that. So again, I would not have felt comfortable at that point presenting it to the board as a verified complaint.
And I know at the hearing there was much discussion between nuisance and dangerousness. Now, there were 2 instances where the dog, one bit a postal carrier, and the other was that they attacked another animal. The other owner didn't attend the meeting, so I don't know what basis we can... Have you spoken with the owner who was part of that interaction?
I did speak with the owner of that dog. That was several months ago when that occurred. It did occur when one of Mr. Davis's dogs was able to leave the property and enter a neighboring property. The altercation between the 2 dogs did not result in any injuries to the other dog. And there was a bit of debate between the 2 owners as to the direct actions in that interaction between the 2 dogs.
Okay. I know that at the April 5th hearing, there was discussion of, you recommended neutering at that time, and it was not taken up. It was stated that the dogs were intended to be bred, but if the dogs, once they get to be 2 years old, people would not want to breed the dog, and I believe that was from Mr. Davis directly, so we're almost at 2 years. I'm not taking a position on neutering or not, I don't know, but by his own testimony at one of the hearings, these dogs are aging out, for lack of a better description, for breeding. So I was concerned about why the opposition to neutering, but I think he answered that here, his concerns. At the October hearing, he did say that he hadn't seen proof it was his dog. So we talk about microchipping it. How can you, it's not a GPS, so unless you physically corral the dog or a police officer or some other member of the staff actually catches the dog, how are you going to identify the dog once it's chipped?
Sure. So the microchipping would come in handy, like as you stated, when we physically became in possession of the dog. So if the dog wasn't wearing a collar or tags, and if Mr. Davis or the owner of the animal attempted to deny that the dog in the kennel was his, we would be able to say with absolute certainty that it was the dog in question. And regarding the picture that was submitted to us from October 11th, the information that we received from the neighbors, again, from two separate neighbors that were not direct abutters from one another, described very similarly the circumstances around that Rottweiler dog pictured being loose. The picture of the dog is very similar and supportive of it being a Rottweiler from 14 Preston Ave, as we don't have any other Rottweilers in that area, and we have no other reports of any Rottweiler-type dogs with issues in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Last but not least, the slats on the fencing. On April 5th, I believe Mr. Davis said that he would put slats on. He volunteered to do so. They're not there yet. So he was given till June 30th, according to the Board of Health, to construct a kennel. Now, I know it wasn't part of the order of the Board of Health that they put slats on, but we're now almost 9 months removed from, actually, we are 9 months removed from where we were in April. So we now have an order for the slats. Do you find that these are going to be effective or they're not, in your professional opinion?
Sure. So some of the testimony that we had received from neighbors in the community was that the dogs appear to be very reactive to any kind of activity going on neighboring properties, in the street. So by physically limiting the dogs' attempt to see or visualize anything happening, that potentially can reduce the nuisance barking. Again, that doesn't mean the dogs can't react to sounds, but at the October 25th meeting, one of the residents did state that the dogs were reactive to them while they were inside of their home in their kitchen, because the dogs were physically able to visualize them while they were inside of their home. So I think that it will help. Again, it might not solve all of the problems related to barking, but hopefully reducing their visibility to some of the things that they're reactive to will cut down on the barking.
I actually do have one more, because again, at one of the hearings, it was mentioned that by Mr. Davis that he did not intend to keep the dogs out, and the law specifically states that under certain conditions, the dog cannot be left out, whether penned or otherwise. In that, his wife has stated she can't physically remove the dog in the event that there were a weather emergency or other such emergency. Is there any concern, or is there anything we can do about addressing that issue? If the person who's home during the day can't deal with the dog's needs, and the owner said it was not his intent to have the dog out there for a 12-hour period of time, and the law does specifically, deal with certain times and whatnot, that a dog should be out, and it shouldn't be out more than 5 hours, I believe. Maybe I'm incorrect, but 12 hours does seem excessive, even in a pen. And again, my concern would be if Mrs. Davis can't physically secure the dogs and get them out of the kennel in case of the absence of Mr. Davis, is there anything that we can do as a community to ensure that the pets are safe when he's not available?
Sure. I am familiar with the law that you're referencing, Chapter 140, Section 174. It's specifically relative to the tethering of dogs. So as these dogs are in a pen, he does meet the other requirements of penning or enclosing an animal on a property as outlined in that. However, I would have concerns for any owner that states they can't physically handle or keep control of their animal. If there were any type of emergency that would require the owner to enter the pen and safely remove the animal, it is a concern that the owners have identified that they have difficulties, that they both have difficulties controlling the animals and being able to handle them safely without them escaping.
Last one, I guess. Dangerousness. What triggers dangerousness?
So I do have the definition by Mass General Law between dangerous and nuisance dog. Ms. Coyle did read from the MGL, from the Massachusetts General Law, the definition of nuisance, but I will offer the definition of a dangerous dog. A dangerous dog is a dog that either, 1, without justification, attacks a person or domestic animal, causing physical injury or death, or 2, behaves in a manner that a reasonable person would believe poses an unjustified imminent threat of physical injury or death to a person or to a domestic or owned animal.
Thank you.
Mr. Berthium?
First question is, Mr. Rafferty brought up the order. Is there an ability to amend the order, or do we have to accept it as a whole or deny it as a whole?
Well, this hearing is for an appeal of the order, so it's my understanding that we would either approve the appeal and the conditions placed on the October 25th would be removed, but the conditions of the April 15th or April meeting would still be in place. If the board chooses to continue the hearing rather than close the hearing, we certainly can check. I want to be sure that this is done right. We can certainly check with Attorney Hennigan to see if this board can modify any of the conditions.
So, not knowing a lot about dogs, and what we're talking about, the owners are saying that the dogs are almost 2 years old, and that's kind of the point that they're supposed to calm down a little bit. But then they're also saying that, they got the dogs for breeding, and what I'm hearing is that, 2 years is kind of the breeding cutoff. Am I hearing that correctly? Is that typical, or what?
That was mentioned in the meeting. However, it wasn't something that I stated. For male dogs, there's that doesn't really apply to a male dog. Their viability will sustain longer than 2-year-old since they're not physically carrying any offspring. So a dog older than 2 is still has the same ability to reproduce.
Okay. So I guess it's my only real other question is then, and maybe I'm not reading this right, is which of the orders got added on the October 29th? Are all of the, I'm looking at the letter of the 29th. Do some of the orders, I'm looking at 1 through Roman numeral 1 through Roman numeral 8, were any of those part of the previous order? and which ones were part of the previous order and which ones are part of the added order?
Sure. The Roman numeral 1 of the, that you see on the letter dated October 29th, the order from the Board of Health, that states, while unattended outside, Barnabas and Ian shall be confined in a securely enclosed and locked pen or a dog run area on the property with a fence not less than 6 feet high and an area not less than 10 feet by 10 feet per dog. That was in the original order.
That was the original, yeah, okay. And that's the only thing that was in the original order?
That was the only thing included in the original order.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Do you have anything, Mr. Liberty?
I have a few. Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Berthium asked most of the questions that I was thinking of. I do have a few comments, but I'll save those. Through the chair, how much would professional training cost? Is there an estimate to that?
That number varies greatly between different trainers and different resources that an owner can contact.
Do you have an idea of what the range would be?
Unfortunately, I don't have a number in front of me. Different levels of training will cost different amounts. For the type of training that I would recommend for these two dogs, they probably need private training, and that's typically more expensive than a group training session, but the specific behaviors that he's identifying would require more one-on-one assistance from a professional trainer than would be available in a group lesson.
See, I have a dog, but he's certainly not Rottweiler size, so I've trained him myself, so I've never gone to any kind of professional training, so I just have no idea what the cost would be or what's required in here. So I really don't know what that's asking for. And then the other question that I had, again through the chair, is this first requirement that was Mr. Berthium asked about, that has been already taken care of with the pen now on the porch, correct?
Correct. The owner did come in compliance with the original order. That was a result of the April 5th meeting, that he construct an outdoor enclosure for the dogs.
Thank you. That's all I have for questions.
Mr. Berthium?
I did have one other question. So when you get a complaint, through the chair, when you get a complaint and then you go out there to observe, obviously it's hard because it's two different times. There's the dogs barking, then there's the complaint, then you have to go out. However, from what I'm hearing from most of the neighbors is pretty much any time there is motion near that house and those dogs are in that pen, there is a pretty big session of barking. So have you ever been out there during the day when the dogs have been in the pen? Because you're kind of telling me that you can't go out and verify that there's a nuisance of barking, but it doesn't make sense to me because everyone's basically saying that when they walk by anywhere near that yard, if those dogs are in that pen, they're getting barked at. They're getting, the dogs are going crazy. They're jumping up against. Have you been there ever that the dogs have been in the pen, and have you seen any of that kind of a reaction?
Sure. As part of my investigation into the complaints, I have been in the area, not directly in front of the house, to not antagonize the dogs to bark at me, to listen to see if I can verify the complaint. Again, I'm confined by our bylaw, where it defines nuisance barking as 15 minutes of consecutive barking. That's not something that I have personally witnessed, but that doesn't mean that frequent barking for a span less than 15 minutes wouldn't be considered a nuisance to somebody in the neighborhood. And again, that's part of the reason why we do have nuisance dog hearings, where this originally did come from a complaint in the neighborhood related to the behaviors of the dogs. It gives towns and boards a little bit more leeway, where if everybody is saying that the barking is causing a nuisance to them and to their personal enjoyment on their property, but it doesn't strictly fall into a category in a bylaw. It's something that a board can recognize at a hearing.
I'm just going to make a follow-up comment to that, because I just kind of wish you had gone, not to antagonize the dogs, but to right now, you know, I don't have any reason to believe that the dogs aren't going to, you know, just continuously bark. But, you know, I appreciate what you're saying, like, that the dogs are penned up and you don't want to antagonize them, but by the same token, we kind of need to know, is this actually what's happening? Like, if you walk by there and, you know, you took a 5-minute walk up the street and down the street, are they going to bark at you the entire time that they're in view? And I think that would have helped and might help in future hearings for us, and that's kind of the comment I had. And it's not in any way telling you how to do your job. It's just I'm saying that it definitely would have helped for me to know. But what I did hear was that you can't deny, or you can't say that they didn't bark when somebody was in front, because you really weren't at the house. So I thank you for that answer.
Sure. Through the chair, if I could add, when I did visit the property October of last year to issue the quarantine for the bite incident, I was at the property for longer than 15 minutes speaking with one of the dog owners. This was when the dogs were confined to the porch and not a kennel, but at that time the dogs were barking at me. They would bark at other things in the neighborhood as well, but it wasn't barking that would be consistent with how it's defined in our bylaws.
Okay. Helpful, thank you.
Mr. Liberty.
I just had a follow-up because of that question through the chair. I'll say this, I didn't consult the bylaws before coming in here on that. Is there a grace period that's offered? 15 minutes of consecutive barking, but if they bark for 15 minutes, is there defined in the bylaws how much time between that initial 15 minutes and another 15-minute period would be acceptable, or? I'm just trying to understand.
It doesn't specifically give a time frame between when, you know, between each bark. Consistent, my interpretation wouldn't be physically consistently barking every 15 minutes, but in a 15-minute span, barking consistently.
So I have a couple questions that were raised, just for the record. If you could address the breeding question. Is he allowed to breed these dogs out of his home?
So currently, there are not any requirements for what would be considered a backyard breeder to obtain any kind of licensing to do that.
And so I guess kind of a statement before I ask my last question. I'm not sure what the board wants to do if we continue it to get additional guidance from Attorney Hennigan. I have some real concerns here, and some of the items that jumped out at me were the quiet and peaceful enjoyment of these people's homes, as well as a very significant statement that you made about concern for the health and safety of our residents. If we were to continue this hearing, do you feel that there are restrictions in place from either specifically from the 11th, or what you can do to ensure the safety and good health of our residents, as well as the quiet and peaceful enjoyment of these residents who have come to speak tonight?
The conditions that were placed on the amended version of the order, I do feel would increase the safety of the residents in that area, specifically no longer allowing the owner to have the dogs on any kind of a tether or dog runner, even while they're present outside, that they would have to have physical control of the dogs at all time while they're moving them, either taking them outside for bathroom breaks or moving them into the kennel to keep them on a leash less than 6 feet long, so that way they have a better physical control over the dogs. That would be a main concern of mine, because it was brought up in the last meeting that they potentially broke a tether, and that was that could have been a cause for the reason why the dogs were reportedly loose on October 11th. In regards to the dogs in the kennel, at this time, we don't have any concerns that the dogs were able to physically open or escape from the kennel. So I do feel that keeping them in a secured, locked kennel is a good safety precaution for the neighborhood.
So if you believe that these dogs have been kept in a secure kennel, do you have an understanding how these dogs have gotten out to use their words, terrorize the neighborhood?
Sure. So from information that I've received from neighbors, there is a potential concern that the owner was allowing the dogs to be tethered outside without attending the dogs, without being present on the property. Ms. Severett did offer a picture at this meeting from October 12th that showed one of the dogs attached to the runner, so attached to a dog line, that was then attached to the house. The picture didn't show the full property, so I can't say with certainty that there was no owner present. There was no owner in direct vicinity of that dog to be able to control it if anything happened.
Mr. Davis, you wanted to add something? Please come up to the microphone.
I'd like to respond to some of the issues and questions that were raised. First, there was a question of whether of the breeding of the dogs. Male dogs, typically in the breeding, you are paid a stud fee or you are offered pick of the litter. Personally, I don't need any more dogs. I've got enough trouble with the 2 that I have. I would take stud fees, and I don't ever intend introducing more Rottweilers. 2 is more than I can handle at this time. I don't want to compound my problems. I don't purport to be a professional trainer. I have raised dogs my whole life. I have been involved with professional trainers, and I have a fairly good idea as to how to house train and how to keep a dog from turning into a mange that's going to bite everything that's going to come down the pike. Mr. Carpenter raised a very good question as to what if there was an emergency and the dog. I work for myself. Emergencies have arrived, and I don't ever work any further than 30 minutes from my home. The majority of my work is at the Auburn Industrial Park, which is in walking distance from my home. I typically can make it home within 10 minutes from any job site. I try to get home for lunch every day and every time that I can. That way I can check on the dogs, make sure that they have water, and if the weather is inclement, they can be brought in. If they're barking incessantly at the time, I bring them in, because I don't want anybody to have to suffer listening to them either. As far as assuring the safety of my neighbors, nobody wants to assure the safety of my neighbors more than I do. I don't want to put anybody at risk, all right? Because the first thing that's going to happen if the dogs attack somebody is they're going to come after me financially. I don't need that kind of trouble, okay? That's why I'm doing everything I can to assure their safety. That's why I went through the trouble and the expense to build these pens, okay? I have the dogs for a certain purpose, and that's protection of my home, all right? As explained in the first meeting, I got these dogs because somebody came into my backyard with bolt cutters, cut a 270-pound outboard motor off a little fishing boat that I had that was parked in my yard. It took 2 people to pick that up. It had to be unbolted from the boat, and they had to take bolt cutters to cut the steering cables out of it. That's pretty bold, all right? And this is while I went down to visit my parents in the Boston area. Okay? I'm not going to let that happen again. I have a lot of equipment working for myself in the construction business in a building that I built in the backyard. I protect my property, and I do so without the use of firearms. I do it with dogs. That keeps people out of my yard. Okay? There was a lot of problems with breaking and entering in our neighborhood, and that's the main reason our neighborhood went from a cat neighborhood to a dog neighborhood. What were some of the other questions that were asked? The cost is considerable to hire professional trainers. The cost is considerable to put a chip to chip the dogs. The cost is very considerable to build the pens. All right? It was over $200 just for the 2 bark collars. All right? I'm not opposed to spending a few dollars, okay? Taking the chance of putting my dogs under general anesthesia. They have to be knocked out, all right? Expose my dogs to a higher risk of certain cancers because of castration. I'm opposed to that. Okay, putting slats to reduce the vision. I'm not opposed to that. Like I said, I'm more than happy to work with people. All right. I think some of your recommendations, the Board of Health's recommendations are over the top. All right. I am being a responsible pet owner, and I'm happy to work with you. But if we can't meet in the middle, this is going to have to go to the next step, and we'll have to go to court and have it adjudicated upon. So, like I said, I'm here to work with you. If we can work it out, great. If we can't, let's move on.
Mr. Carpenter?
I just have a couple questions through you to the animal control officer. So by my count, there were 3 times that the dog was reported loose. At any time, was the town able to get the dog, or is it just reports from the neighbors that they saw the dog, and you weren't able to actually verify that the dog was outside of the yard?
At the times that we received the complaints, the dogs were no longer loose, so we received the complaints after the fact. One time being when the dog did leave the property and had some sort of interaction with a neighboring dog. That wasn't reported until after the fact, as well as the most recent report from October.
And my only other question is, so the dog, we have the testimony from Board of Health that the dogs are aggressive, that they're difficult. We have competing claims, I don't know, sometimes from the applicant tonight. We have competing claims within those 2 hearings. At the April hearing, you volunteered to assist him in the design, or at least inspections, and helping him through the process. I know somebody mentioned due process and not understanding the process. Can you just walk us through what you did between the April 5th and the June 30th period?
Sure.
Just so that it's on the record.
Sure. Between those 2 hearings, I didn't physically go to the property. At those points, I wasn't offered an invitation by the owner. By driving by the neighborhood to verify that the owner was following the timeline prescribed by the Board of Health, I could verify that Mr. Davis was complying with the order in regards to the construction of the kennel. We were in touch after the meeting after the April 5th meeting, to just go over specifically what the Board of Health was looking for him to build, and he was compliant and willing to work with the Board of Health's order to get that kennel constructed into compliance.
So you haven't physically inspected it? Nobody from the town has inspected the kennel?
Correct. Nobody has gone and physically inspected the kennel, and no town employee would be able to look at the kennel and say with 100% certainty that there is no way that a dog in that kennel could ever leave the kennel.
No, my concern is the 6-foot-high fence, and I know that there's a building code that if it's over 6, they have to get a building permit, and I know that can be problematic for boards, land use boards, but when you have a dog that is aggressive by the owner's own statement, and he has tried, and he has stated at the meetings that he has tried to train them, but we're still hearing these complaints. So we have a room full of people telling us that this is a problem, and we're hearing that we're working with people. So I guess I'm at odds I'm glad that we have a kennel. I am concerned that somebody isn't on site that can take care of the dogs, or the dogs could be physically, harmed if he was not able to get there in time. Another concern is it's to protect the house, but if I read the order correctly or heard the order correctly, the dog is not allowed to be outside tethered any longer. So the dog can't roam the property, so I don't understand what protection it's providing in a kennel.
And through the chair,
We're on board questions right now. I'll give you an opportunity to speak after we're done.
I can't speak to the intentions of the owner is using those dogs as any kind of a protection for his property to prevent any kind of intruders from entering it. I would like to say that we did confer with the building department and the building commissioner regarding any potential permits that would be needed for the construction of that dog kennel, and it was determined that it wouldn't require any permits.
Thank you.
I have a couple more questions for you. You said, going back to the barking, and I don't want to, get really hung up on this, I just want to make sure the record is very clear. You said that, when you went, you determined that, it was unfounded. Is that based on the bylaw of the town? I mean, are you saying that these dogs are not barking, and the barking is unfounded, or is it unfounded to the specifics of our bylaw?
I would consider it to be unfounded to the specifics of the bylaw. Again, if we're receiving a report of excessive barking after the fact and not when the barking is going on, we don't have the potential to go out in and see if at that exact moment the barking is happening. Again, we might be restricted by hours in that regards, so we do rely on people in the neighborhood to provide information. But when I did do site visits to the area, it was not something that I witnessed and confines to our bylaws.
Okay. So, as our animal control officer, you are very well versed in Mass General Law, as well as our own town's bylaws. You are a highly respected animal control officer, and still a very compassionate animal control officer. We know that you have stayed up all night caring for an injured animal. So 2 questions. Do you support the recommendations made at the October 25th hearing?
I do.
And this will be my last question. If a public safety official, be it police, fire, EMT, needed to respond to that home, do you have any concerns for safety?
I would have concerns for anybody's safety entering that home, if for any reason an owner was incapacitated, or if, as previously stated, one of the owners is unable to manage the dogs. So I would have concerns for anybody entering that property that the dogs may react to them.
And there was just one other question that you may or may not be able to answer, because I think you just mentioned you have not seen it, so maybe the property owner can answer this question. The issue was raised about what type of flooring that this has. Are you aware of the flooring?
I'm not aware of what type of flooring he has in the enclosure.
Do members have any more questions? No. Okay. Mr. Davis, if you want to take the microphone, please. You wanted to address a couple comments.
I'd like to respond to a couple of the issues brought up. First off, there was a picture shown of my dog sitting on the porch unattended. It's very easy to crop pictures and make it look like whatever you want it to look like. All right? I've been taking these dogs out personally every time they have to go to the bathroom, every time they go to the pen, at all hours of the day and night. I'm always taking them out. I am complying with the orders that were given to me that these dogs are to be under my control. Okay? There was a question of animal control's visit to the house. She was posed that same question on the first hearing that we had at the Department of Health hearing when they were originally deemed nuisance dogs, and I believe her response is recorded on that videotape as to what happened. So that may be a little, because that visit was a little more recent when that question was asked, that her response may be a little fresher than as she's remembering it now. You can take a look at the original video, and that will answer the question as to what happened when she visited the house. I think you'll be pretty surprised at her answer. The questions about the quality of the build of the house. I'm a licensed master electrician. I've also been a licensed unrestricted construction supervisor. I'm very aware of all of the building codes required to build this, what the requirements are, what my limitations are, the quality of the materials that were used. I kept the structures as large as I could make them without them being so big that I would be required to have a building permit. I met all requirements of the order by the health department was to have 6 foot high, and I believe it's 7 foot high is the limitation. 6'11" is the limit. At 7 foot, you have to pull a permit. She required 10 by 10 pens. Mine are 10 by 20 each, with built-on dog pens. Not only are they dog houses, but they have a porch that they can lay on and a roof over the porch. Her concerns for any emergency responders, we have the dogs trained to stay in the kitchen. If anybody comes to the door, they don't leave the kitchen. They'll bark at you from the kitchen. There's a gate there. It's not a terribly big gate. It's one that you would use for a small child. They've never charged through it. They're trained to stay. Of course, if you act aggressively and threaten my wife at all, I wouldn't give you 2 seconds in that house. All right? The dogs are protective. All right? As far as people being incapacitated and the police having to respond, both of us are able to get the dogs under control and contained in the event that anybody has to come in.
Is that all you have?
That's pretty much it.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? In the back, please, sir.
I also haven't been sworn in yet.
Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Bob Sivret, 13 Preston Ave, and I also can corroborate with a videotape on October 12th that shows the dog on the stoop on the runner that's not supposed to be unattended. About a minute, I was getting into my car to go to work in the morning, and the dog was there. I saw no sign of any of the homeowner watching after his dog. Later that day when I came home, I have a photo. This is a video. I have a photo that at approximately 4:43 in the afternoon that shows the dog on the stoop again. Now, I can't say, because I wasn't there all day, but I can't say that the dog was taken in or put back out, but I do have approximately a 10-hour window where I have a video and a photograph time-stamped. And this is, I believe, on the day after the complaint was, or had happened, of the dog breaking out and going to the neighbor's house. This is October 12th.
I can have the animal control officer look at that, and then she can testify to that.
Okay,
if you'd
I
like.
personally, that day, witnessed the dog running back and forth. I did provide a letter corroborating that. Prior to today, I did not want to speak for fear of retribution, which I believe in some way, shape, or form may have already happened. I've had vandalism at my home already. So I was trying to take the high road and be an observer more than an accuser, but it's come to the point where I feel personally as if the homeowner is trying to pull the wool over your eyes, and I have to now submit something that I had kept to myself, so.
Okay. We can have the animal control officer review that with the, with Darlene. Could you please, this gentleman's speaking right now.
And this was from my car. I'm sorry about the poor quality. I probably was narrating it, but I had my volume down.
It's going to be too hard to pass it, so we'll have her testify to what she saw.
If it's all right, can I still see the time? I'd like to see the timestamp.
And I thought that it was in violation at the time, but I wasn't sure if there was a tether, inclusion on that or not, so I wasn't sure. I'm directly across the street in my driveway. On another day, I'm a little nervous, so I'm shaking here. On another day, this is my wife leaving the property with our car, and the dog is tethered there, and this is a live kind of a photo, and the dog leaps, which that is the scariest part, when the dog was on the tether of I could be in my driveway or coming out of my car and going up my front stairs, and the dog would leap in a way that would choke itself and bounce it back and leap again and choke itself and bounce itself back. And that's the frightening thing. If it breaks off and it comes, I'm at its mercy at that point. So that's what is the really scary thing about sports. And there's also a timestamp.
Excuse me one second. We just want to get the video into the record and then go back to the microphone for testimony, just so that we can all hear it. So have you seen that?
And you didn't know.
I have.
Ms. Contois, if you could,
on the same day.
Ms. Contois, if you could just take that phone just for 1 minute. Mr. La Liberty would like to see the timestamp on that. If you could show him the timestamp on that.
Sure.
Thank you. And then you can go back to the microphone, sir, and just share with us what you just shared with Ms. Contois. And we have a timestamp? Okay, could we just have it for the record, please?
October 12th.
Thank you. Okay. And if you could just, because you weren't at the mic, if you could just talk about the incident you just shared with Ms. Contois.
The incident I shared was my fear of when the dog is tethered on the runner is that it can break off, which I also had witnessed at another time. I don't know what happened after that, if it was quickly gathered and brought back in the house. I did not complain to anyone about it, but just one of those things that I noticed. But anytime there's anyone walking up and down the street, or personally me in my driveway, my family, the dog would lunge in a way that was very menacing. It would choke itself literally at the end of the runner, bounce back with like the tug of the runner, and charge again and choke and charge. And it happened a lot when the dog was on the runner. I can't say daily, but very often. So that in itself was the scariest part for me. Always having to be prepared, like, what if it breaks? What am I gonna do? So that's the lack of peace of mind that I'm suffering over when the dog is not in the kennel. The barking, to be in all honesty, I have a dog that'll bark at the mailman. She'll stay in the window right over my driveway when the mailman comes, and my dog barks. My dog hasn't attacked anyone, and I don't think I've had a problem with any neighbors with my dog leaving my yard or anything like that. So there had been some statement of that prior, that we have a vicious dog by the other homeowner. In my opinion, a deflection of guilt. But that's the scariest part that I just wanted to mention. If the dog gets off, I don't even know which dog it is. It could be one, it could be either. I'm not even sure. They look very similar. But the fear is there. When they're in the kennel and it's locked, as far as the dog getting out on that given day, maybe the dog never got out of the kennel. Maybe the dog wasn't in the kennel to begin with and got out a different way. Like, I can't open the kennel, the thing's locked, it's so hard to get in. I have no idea. Maybe it wasn't latched that day. You know, just offering a couple of scenarios that could have happened. Not like it's impossible when it's in there and it's locked that it can't get out, probably, but maybe it was never in there. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming forward.
Madam Chair, before Mr. Sievert leaves, can I just ask a question?
Excuse me, sir?
You guys can have a law.
Sir? Sir? Mr. Carpenter had a question for you? Yes, please.
So through the chair, you mentioned that your house was vandalized. What was the nature of the vandalism, and did you report it to APD?
I did not report it to the police department. I have an in-ground pool, and we had a problem losing water around midsummer. We were in denial a little bit at the time because we thought it was humidity and the real scorching heat we had. And found out through putting the hose in repeatedly, even after rainstorms, we were still losing water. So we had the pool company come in. They did an underground test on my lines, and they did a test on the liner. And they found 2 holes that they patched with an odd piece of liner and some glue in my deep end of my pool, approximately 7 feet deep. A week went by, and we kept leaking, so we thought they possibly didn't do a good job. So we phoned them back, and they came back out again, and subsequently found 11 more holes around the bottom of my pool that, in my opinion, couldn't possibly be caused by, the liner is approximately 10 years old, the pool is 20, we had it replaced due to a branch falling off a stick 10 years ago. So with these, all the holes were very consistent with being approximately a foot off the bottom of the pool, on the slant in the deep end, and all 3 sides. And the count was at least 11 holes. So they came back and they repatched those. And the thought process is that I have no enemies in the neighborhood. I can't call my neighbor my enemy, but I can say that we've had words at some point, and we've had issues over the years, but with no other neighbor there, and with what's happening, where I feel that possibly he feels that we've cost him money, and he had to rebuild his kennel and do all that stuff and cost him money. Well, it's going to cost them something for getting me in trouble. So I was trying to remain silent about it, but it's gotten to a point where there is fear now, and I can't prove anything, but I'm in the process of procuring cameras for the 4 corners of my home, some of which I may point towards the street, so that possibly if I see another violation and the dog is not in the kennel, it'll pick it up on that, and I don't have to physically video and be present. So that's where we're at now.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Yes, you may.
I know that there was questions of mail delivery issues. Has that abated? Has it improved?
What we were told was if the dog was unattended outside and not in the kennel, they wouldn't deliver. Mail can be sporadic. We don't always get mail every day, and we're not typically home. Sometimes we are, but sometimes we're not when the mail arrives. So I don't know if he's bypassing on a given day or not. Mail has gotten better. We have received mail. We haven't had to pick it up at the post office. So it has improved, I'll say, but I'm not 100% sure if they've skipped us occasionally.
Thank you.
I am going to allow you to speak. I just want to make a statement. I'm sorry, sir, you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Okay,
Yep.
you may sit down. So this is a public hearing. Everyone who's spoken has been sworn. This board is not taking a position on anyone's credibility right now. What we're doing is gathering facts. If a resident makes a statement that is derogatory to someone else, that is all part of the hearing. It's not a position of the board. It's all part of the public process. Having said that, you may come forward.
I actually did text Officer Dyson on October 10th to let us know what had happened with our pool, so he is aware of what had happened with our pool.
Okay, so we can make that part of the record. Did you have something else you wanted to add, Mr. Davis?
Up to October 25th hearing, when I was ordered to keep that dog on a 6-foot leash and keeping it intended, it was my understanding that we could keep the dog on a tether as long as I was home. I was home. The dog has been out numerous times up until I was ordered not to let him out on the tether. Both of them went out, and I'd let them out to use the bathroom. They have to go out at odd hours of the night to use the bathroom. Okay? So I don't disagree with the fact that he has a video of my dog on October 12th, because prior to the 25th, I was allowed to let my dog out on the run.
Okay. Do you have anything else?
That's it.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I just ask a question of Mr. Davis before?
Mr. Davis, if you can just go back to the microphone. Mr. Carpenter has a question for you.
I'm going to just ask you a question. The flooring of the kennel, I know at the hearing you mentioned it was going to be pea stone, then somebody suggested concrete. What is the flooring of the kennel?
The flooring is dirt right now.
It's dirt, okay. And just to be clear, I am aware of what Ms. Contoy said when in the April meeting. I was referencing you had asked her to assist you in the design of the kennel and to assist. I was asking her specifically, had she been able to inspect it? That isn't suggesting that it's not.
Offered no suggestions for design, never came to inspect it. She was invited to come and take a look at it, and I was told that it is not her job to come and inspect it. Her job is to answer the complaints that were made against the dogs, and it's my responsibility to take care of the building of and to comply with the orders.
Okay.
As far as putting gravel down, there may be, people seem to think that there's a question of a sanitary issue with the dogs. It's packed loam, so things flow off the top of it, doesn't sink in, and it can be rinsed down. I go out every day and clean up after the dogs, and at least twice a week it gets hosed down. Of course, in the winter, when things are sub-zero, that's not quite possible, but that's the case with any dogs.
Do you have anything else you want to add to this hearing tonight?
Unless other people have more things to bring up, because I'll respond to everything everybody has to bring up.
Please have a seat. Is there anyone else in the audience who has anything to say? Mr. Legg, and then Sir after.
Just an observation about Preston Ave and walking. Through the chair, I had heard that Mr. Davis walks the dog regularly. In previous times before the kennel was constructed, I remember seeing him walk the dog up onto Field Street, up Preston, which is very steep, using a heavy chain. The steepness of the street combined with hazardous conditions could make it so that the dog could escape, and the owner could be more likely to slip and fall and become hurt, and therefore perhaps have the dog more worried about whatever else might be going on. So I am concerned now in hearing that he walks the dog every day, wondering where he's walking the dog, and if these control issues can be more problematic with, foul weather coming. So I don't know how to pose this question to Mr. Davis or to others to encourage people to give some more thought about problems with his being able to control the dog.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir?
Jeremy Harris, 21 Elmwood. I do have a problem with the way he washes the pen down because I'm downhill from his property. So what he's saying, he's washing all his animal waste into my yard where my son plays. Am I correct on that? That's what he just said, correct?
He did say he washes the pen.
He washes it down. I'm downhill. Water flows downhill, correct? I'm downhill. I mean, so my kid's playing in like dog feces and pee.
We can see which department would look into that for you.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
You can. I want to give you full opportunity to be heard.
The way the dog kennels are constructed, there are two pieces of property to the side of my, our house faces Preston Ave this way. To the left of the house is where the two dog kennels are. There's a property that's approximately halfway back on our property, and the second half is his property. The dog kennels are both located forward of that. So anything that's washing off and going down into any yard, it would be the people directly beside him, not his house. All right? There are runoffs throughout there's a stream that runs through my backyard that then runs along the back side of it and then out to a drainage ditch and under the road, all right? So there's no way any waste could get into his yard.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Is it about the runoff? Please come forward.
He says there's a stream running through his yard, but it's his drain from his garage or what have you. There's a pipe coming out of the side of the hill about yay big. So that's far from a stream.
Any issues raised tonight that are of concern to the Department of Inspectional Services can be addressed by that department. Ms. Contois and Ms. I know that, Darlene, I'm so sorry. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to be heard. I know we're better than 2 hours into this hearing. I don't want it to be said that everyone didn't have an opportunity to be heard. But I am quite confident, seeing you take notes, that you have some comments you'd like to make.
Thank you. I would like to just state, I'm not a building inspector. I do not have the knowledge and experience of our building department. I can't inspect the soundness of a structure after it's been constructed and form a professional opinion in that regard. I can say that I did have multiple discussions with Mr. Davis before and after the April 5th hearing in regards to constructing a kennel on his property that I would consider acceptable to hopefully contain the dogs on the property. The original mention of building an enclosure on the property came up before I spoke with Mr. Davis. It came through a discussion between myself and the postmaster discussing the issues of a stop of service in the neighborhood relative to the postmaster's concern for his staff delivering mail because of the dogs on the property. The postmaster identified that he would be comfortable continuing service to the neighborhood if the dogs were in a locked, secured pen on the property. It was after my discussion with the postmaster that I spoke about this with Mr. Davis and did let him know before the hearing on April 5th that that would be my recommendation to the Board of Health, that he construct the kennel on the property. And I did speak with him again after the April 5th hearing to go over again the requirements made by the board, recommendations that are offered through Mass General Law, Chapter 140, and after conferring with the building department whether or not he would require any permits for the structure that he was building on his property. And I would also like to mention, because this was brought up, the cost of microchipping. The implantation of a microchip is available through low-cost veterinary clinics and services in our area. The town has an annual low-cost vaccine and microchip clinic here at Town Hall. Every spring, microchipping there costs less than $20. Additionally, the Petco in town also has low-cost clinics every weekend where microchipping, again, is less than $20.
Mrs. Coyle, is there anything you want to add?
There's obviously a lot of comments that have been made tonight. Certainly, you can see that it is a very emotional matter. The Board of Health takes it very seriously, which I think goes to the fact that we had 2 hearings on it. It's been a public process. We've followed the laws through that process, and at the end of the day, these recommendations that were discussed by the board and by the animal control officer, who has years of experience, again, we're trying to keep people safe, everybody involved. We're trying to keep restrictions that are reasonable, that make sense to try to prevent something from happening. Again, these dogs are deemed nuisance dogs. We don't want to move down the road towards dangerous dogs, which is why the board took a conservative approach in the first hearing. There were many options that were discussed in the first hearing. I think Mr. Carpenter made mention to it. The board was very conservative and tried to work with the dog owner, understanding the cost and the time, gave him ample time, and allowed him to build the kennel. I would support, Ms. Contois is not there to inspect the kennel. It is identified as, under Mass General Law, what the kennel has to be, and the owner of the dogs he has the responsibility to make sure that it meets the definition under the Mass General Law. The final hearing that was on October 25th, again, recommendations were made, again, to try to protect the health and safety of all that are involved in this neighborhood. We think they're fair. We think it's reasonable. We feel that the process has been a public process, and I certainly would support. Our animal control officer has spent, I can't even imagine, to give you the amount of time that she has spent on this and working with Mr. Davis and the community to try to find a reasonable resolution to this issue. So again, I support her 110%. And again, I ask for the board's support. The Board of Health takes this seriously, and they made a determination. We ask for your support in upholding the order.
Excuse me, do you have anything you want to add before we close the hearing?
Real quick.
If you can wait till you get up to the microphone, please. Just don't speak till you get up to the microphone so we can all hear you.
I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I commend what Amy has done in trying to sort this out, to make suggestions to help alleviate the problems. I agree with the majority of what she has suggested. There are a few that I don't agree with at all, and I never will. Okay? If we can find common ground and work this out, like I said, that'll be fine. If we can't, we'll move to the next level and we'll take it from there.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Is there anything else? Anyone else before we close it to public comment? The board now has 2 options. We can either continue the hearing or we can close the hearing, deliberate, and take action. Mr. La Liberty.
I have a few concerns. The first being that most of the complaints from the neighbors seem to be noise-related, and it doesn't seem like our bylaws were violated. So my concern on that end would be punishing a resident for violating a law that they didn't break because we don't have it. That's a problem with our bylaws, and that's a problem with our bylaws. That being said, there are other major concerns that the Board of Health has been looking into. And the major issue that Mr. Davis has seemed to be opposed to that was on here was the neutering of his dogs. None of the neighbors, the residents that spoke, had an issue with that. If anything, they seemed sympathetic to that cause. I would support holding off on this, seeing what town council has to offer, if it's possible to amend this or allow it in part, approve the appeal in part to remove that section, and see if we're able to do that at our next meeting.
Are you making a motion to continue the hearing?
I'll make a motion to continue the hearing on that.
Is there a second?
Second.
So the motion has been made to continue the hearing and seconded. We're under discussion for continuing the hearing. Mr. Carpenter?
Do we need a separate vote to request an opinion from council?
We do.
I will say, under discussion, that my concern, having watched both hearings and hearing the neighbors, and many of them have come tonight, as well as Mr. Davis has come to every hearing, I am concerned with the disconnect of they're not barking, but they are barking. We're finding a nuisance. Well, the Board of Health is finding a nuisance, but the ACO hasn't been able to spend sufficient time to document it. So I guess that's a concern of mine as part of the process. If we can't, on the one hand, we're saying they're not founded because you can't verify them, but yet we have neighbors who are giving us certainly compelling testimony. So I think that is a concern going forward for me, is if we don't have enough time for staff to spend at the site to see if the dog is going to do whatever they're going to do. I have no idea how you do it. I don't pretend. I am concerned about amending the order. I'm not a Board of Health person. I don't know enough about what the Board of Health does to sit there and say that I should alter their decision. I know it came up twice. Neutering was a recommendation of the ACO twice. First time it wasn't adopted. The second time it was adopted by the Board of Health. So clearly the people who deal with this on a day-to-day basis felt that something between April and October changed. We don't have any of that necessarily in the hearing process. I didn't hear a lot of that in October from the Board of Health members, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have concerns. And that's why they chose to accept the recommendation a second time. So I would be concerned about amending it, but I am certainly in support of at least finding out if the answer is there. If we can amend it, just for information purposes.
So if we do continue the hearing, it's not just continuing the hearing to get an opinion from Attorney Hennigan. If the hearing is continued, it would still be an open hearing. It would still be subject to public comment, public input. I just want to be clear. So if it is continued, anyone is willing to attend and provide additional testimony. Does anyone else have comments? Mr. Berthium.
Question through the chair. So if it is a continuation, would we be able to address it relatively quickly, or is there a number of days that if we have a continuance that we have to wait so many days?
So it's a technical question. Mr. Davis has filed an appeal through the Board of Selectmen. Are we under a timeline for under Mass General Law to provide a decision?
Through the chair,
As the appellant board.
So as the general bylaws, I think what has been met is there's a certain amount of time he has to appeal. And so we actually talked to Mr. Davis about that, and the board has responded and set up a meeting. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, that you have a certain time to make a decision on that. It's just that you have to offer a hearing for the appeal. If I may, am I able to? I did want to just clarify some of the discussion just regarding the order that the board voted for on October 25th had to do with the fact that at least one dog was observed loose in the neighborhood. There's been a lot of discussion, and I can see how it may kind of add into the pieces, because I do hear from a lot of the residents in the area that the barking is a concern. The board action that they took on October 25th was in response to the dog being in violation of the order from April 5th. So the dogs, while outside, were not contained in the pen. So even if they were outside of the pen in the owner's yard and were not contained, that's a violation of the order. Further, the dog was off the property in somebody else's property. So the board took action on that. I know there's been a lot of discussion regarding the investigation of barking, but I think that's a separate issue. I just wanted to clarify that. Amy, feel free to jump in. I do recognize the barking concerns, but that, I think, is a separate issue than what the determination that was made on October 25th. This was in response to the dog being in violation of that first order. Ms. Contois checks out every complaint and certainly is reasonable about checking out complaints. We would take the amount of time that we need to do to thoroughly investigate a complaint. Amy is very thorough. So I just want to...
I'm just going to cut you off here, just because we just want to, the question pertained to the motion on the floor, which is continuing the hearing and asking about the Mass General Law.
Sure.
I believe you'll have more time for additional information, but we're on the motion of continuing the hearing, Mr.
Just to
Berthium.
clarify, I think you might have misunderstood my question. My question is that if we meet 2 weeks from now, can we continue the hearing then? Can we get our answers and continue the hearing then? My concern is that there's a lot of residents that are here that sounds like have been, had this, for lack of any other word, a nuisance for a long time, and it's not, I may vote differently if I'm told that we can't come back on this hearing, for 3 months. So my question is, how quickly can we get our answer and come back to open this, continue this hearing?
So the question is, if we continue the hearing for 2 weeks, can Attorney Hennigan provide a written opinion as to whether the board can modify the decision of the Board of Health, modify the October 25th decision of the Board of Health? So I would imagine Town Council would need to research this, and, I mean, we could ask him to make this a priority, but I don't know that we would have it.
Through the chair, I don't know how we could identify how much time it will take him. I don't know what he's going to have to research to do this. And I do want to just clarify something, and correct me if I'm wrong. This particular appeal is being done under the town's bylaw. This is not an appeal under Mass General Law, which is a separate process. So just to keep them separate, this is under the town's own bylaw. Then Mass General Law also provides a vehicle for an appeal process, which would be through the district court. Mr. Davis has an option of doing both. He did, for this point, choose to come to the board as an appeal, but he could follow the next step after this, if he so chose, under Mass General Law, and seek an appeal under Mass General Law. So what we would be asking town council to do would be to provide a determination on whether the Board of Selectmen can amend a decision that was made by the Board of Health under the process of appeal as afforded by our own bylaws, not under Mass General Law. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Does anyone else have anything under the motion on the floor to continue the hearing? Mr. La Liberty?
I just wanted to say that if we take action and vote on this tonight as it is, I don't know, I think there is room to compromise here on that motion, on that one part of this. So I really would urge other members of the board to consider pushing this off at least one more meeting.
Mr. Berthium, did you have something?
I mean, I'm kind of leaning the other way, and all indications are that it's going to get appealed to a higher or another level anyway, and I mean, everything that I've heard, and as much as I understand, I kind of feel like I'm in support of the dog officer and the Board of Health at our town level.
So under discussion on whether we're going to continue the hearing, I will not vote to support continuing the hearing. I think that we've heard enough testimony to make a decision. What we're voting on is whether we have made a determination that the dog owner violated the conditions of the April hearing, of the April order, and the dog was off of a leash and therefore violated that. Mr. La Liberty?
I'll make one last plea to the other members of the board. Mr. Davis is here saying that he's willing to compromise on this. I think we should take every opportunity we can to compromise on something before we allow it to go on further, before this becomes a bigger issue where the town may have to defend its actions in a district court. I think taking the 2 weeks is really a small ask. If we do go through with this and it seems like the board is going in that direction, we're asking him to neuter the dogs, which seems to me unnecessary at this point. The neighbors haven't asked for that. Would prefer we don't. That's something that he can't take back once it's done, especially if he's planning to breed these dogs. So again, I'd urge the board to consider moving it. But that's my last comment on this.
Did anyone help?
I just have a question.
Mr. Carpenter?
Is there a procedure where the Board of Health, we're not a court, we can't remand back to the Board of Health? I'm assuming, considering the length of time that you both took and the board took, that you're comfortable with your recommendation. Would the board be willing to look at this again and potentially amend the order? Is there a process where they could do that?
Through the chair, I myself have not gone through this process. However, I am always willing to take a look to see if that's a possibility. You know, I don't know the answer right now. I wouldn't give you an answer that I wasn't confident with. So it's certainly something we could ask Attorney Hennigan, but it's typically when the board approves for a decision, that's the order. But obviously, everything is not black and white.
If I could, I mean, to Mr. LaLiberty's point, if we did hold it for 2 weeks, which I'm not saying hold it, don't hold it, it depends what the majority wants as far as if we go to town council. I think we also have to think of the Board of Health. Are we having them negotiate with a loaded gun to their head? You either go this way or we go to court. So I think we need to think of it that way too, that the Board of Health has had 2 hearings, lengthy hearings. They've heard from the residents tonight, and again, just like those past hearings, it's a tale of 2 neighborhoods. One side saying the dog is barking incessantly, the owner saying, I'm doing everything I can, but we're 6 months in, and we're actually, from the original complaint, it's even more than that. We're over a year from the 2017 complaints that you got, which I understand we're not talking necessarily about noise, but that's what all these hearings have been about. That's what the residents have talked about. They've talked about noise. They've talked about an aggressive dog, but they haven't talked about, so I can't ignore the noise situation because that's all they've been talking about in your hearings. So clearly it's an issue for them that we need to resolve quickly. I know the slats weren't approved initially, now they have been approved. We don't have a time frame. We had a time frame for the kennel. So for consistency's sake, I would just suggest to the Board of Health, if they're going to do these timelines, that they say, if somebody tells them they're going to do slats, that just like the kennel, it has to be done by a date certain, and if not, then we're in violation, because I think, yes, the dog was loose, or at least is reported to be loose, but we're still hearing the noise complaint. So that, I can't divorce myself from the fact that that's what I heard in both hearings consistently. Yes, there was the fear of aggressive dogs, there was fear of the dog jumping against the kennel wall, person at the sink doing dishes, doing whatever. He was getting barked at incessantly. You know, somebody's doing work on their house, the dog's sitting there, and while we can all say the dog wouldn't menace, if you're fearful of dogs, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that with the owner. The owner is, of course, the dog hopefully would never attack the owner, but we have residents. So somebody's working on the house, the dog's at the door, he's too far away to shut the door to secure himself. I'm sure he didn't want to bolt to then get the dog to perhaps give chase. So I think, you know, noise is a big issue with me with this, and that's what the residents have consistently talked about, and I have heard aggressiveness as well, both from the owner as well as the residents. So.
Mr. Berthium, I just want to remind members, the motion is whether we're going to continue the hearing. Mr. Berthium.
Through the chair to the town manager. So when the town manager had just explained, you know, this is a town bylaw, and then there's state bylaw. So if the next appeal, does the state override the town? Would the appeal go to the state?
Goes to Superior Court.
Through the chair, if I can too, I'm going to turn to Amy for the process on that.
Sure, thank you. So the appeal process is described in Mass General Law, Chapter 140, Section 157, which encompasses the full dangerous or nuisance dog hearing. As part of the appeal process, an owner, through Mass General Law, has the right to appeal to district court. Mass General Law sets a time frame for when the owner has to appeal the latest decision by. So in accordance with our Mass General laws, the owner could appeal on a decision made by the Board of Selectmen to the district court within 10 days. He then has the right to appeal either the decision or request a de novo hearing in front of the district court, which would be a new hearing.
Through the district court.
Through the district court.
Is there anything else on the motion? All those in favor of continuing the hearing till December 10th?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye.
Aye.
Motion fails. Is there another motion?
I'll make a motion, we close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor of closing the hearing?
Aye.
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 Is there a motion regarding the applicant's request for, whether we...
Motion that we uphold the Board of Health ruling of October 25th, 2018.
Second.
Is there a discussion under the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Make a motion, we take a
Brief
5-minute or brief recess.
Is there a second?
Second.
We are in recess. Downstairs. Okay, you're on. I'd like to call the meeting back to order.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to move up item 5E.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So voted. So we are on Board of Selectmen general item, vote on acceptance of Section 18B of Chapter 53 to allow town-sponsored mailings regarding ballot questions. This is something that Mr. La Liberty had requested, and in your packet, you have a letter dated October 22nd, multi-page letter from the town manager. Mr. La Liberty, did you want to talk to this first?
Sure, I can just make a last, one last appeal for it, I guess, or talk about it. So I'll say that at the last question that we had that was a ballot question was the marijuana issue. And I know I wasn't on the board at the time when the board voted to make that a ballot initiative. I know at the time I wouldn't have supported it personally if I were up here, because I know that we have very low turnout in our local elections. We saw many more people in Auburn, larger demographically as well. More people showed up when the state voted, and Auburn passed it. So I wouldn't have supported putting it on that ballot. That being said, it was. That was the year that I was up, so I was at the polls most of the day talking to residents that were coming in, and I think it was only 9% or 9-point-something% turnout in that election. That 9% turnout is typical for local elections, a little bit lower than usual. But in our local elections, the people that are showing up are the diehards that are going to come to every election. And I know Mr. Berthium also mentioned that he talked to residents on that day that were going in to see the question. I'm sure Mr. Carpenter also did. The people that I talked to, they were the diehards. They knew who their candidates were. They were going in planning to vote for whoever they were. And some of them, I'm sure they were reading Auburn Mass Daily, Auburn News, where this question was posted. But some of them still didn't know it was a question on the ballot until I either mentioned it to them or they went in and saw it and voted on it. And those are people that were paying attention to the races that are always turning out. And some of them voted the wrong way. Members of my own family that knew about the election and knew that there was a question on the ballot voted one way when they meant to vote the other. I see this as something that could correct that in future ballot questions. So I do think there is a necessity for it. Don't see it as irrelevant. I see it as something that affects really every voter in town. The second thing that I'd want to add is we've talked about voter turnout in our last couple of meetings, and that's something that's come up several times. I don't think the board can really continue to talk about it and not be willing to look at other options. And this doesn't have to be the end-all be-all to increase voter turnout, certainly. But I think this is something that we could look into to see if it would increase turnout. If people seeing that there's something on the ballot that they're interested in, if they'd be willing to go and more willing to go out and vote. Certainly would be at the very least a reminder that there's an election. That being said, I know one of the things we had talked about at our last meeting was what other towns have already adopted this and what have they seen. So I'll ask the town manager what she found to that regard, what other towns have already adopted it. If the board wants to push this back further, I mean, there's no rush on it. I asked for a vote because I figured everyone seemed kind of set. But certainly I'd be willing to wait to see. I don't know, maybe we would want to reach out to other towns and see if, when they did this, they saw an increase in voter turnout. So certainly open to trying that, and I'm know how I'm going to vote, so I'm open to voting tonight. That's all I have to add to it.
Mr. Berthium?
Could we, through the chair, get an answer on that?
Sure. Through the chair, I had spoken with the town clerk after the last meeting and asked her to reach out to the elections division and any other state offices that could give this information. As I mentioned at the last meeting, I had tried to find that information. I couldn't find it online. It doesn't mean it wasn't there. I just wasn't having any luck finding it. So the town clerk reached out to the state, and they did respond that they also don't have a running list of those communities that have adopted this chapter. They said the only way that they could do it would be for us to provide names of towns that we want them to research, and then they would have to go in and research whether those towns adopted it. Ultimately, there are records, but it was not something that they kept on a running basis, so we still don't have that answer. The board had also asked me, through the chair, for a couple of other things, so if you don't mind, I'll just share all of them with you. The other question was to talk to Attorney Hennigan and have him, to the best he can, provide an estimate. And to paraphrase what he said, basically there is no way to do that. He said there were too many factors that go into this, too many variables. He said, number one, how many questions would be on the ballot? Number two, how many proponents or opponents would come forth and make a presentation to provide the statements that the town council is required under the law to review, and then to weigh, and then to make a decision on which group to go with. He said if it's one group, if it's 10 group, he has to weigh every single decision. If there's a proponent but no opponent, he has to write the opposing statement. If there is an opponent and no proponent, he has to write the statement in favor of. If there's neither, he has to write both. So he has to write the argument for and the argument against. All of that times as many questions as there are. So it could be anywhere from, a minimum of 10 or 15 hours up to something that's countless over 50 or 60. Really no way to tell, so don't want to give you a figure that's not accurate. The other thing that I was asked about was other potential costs. So the town clerk's office provided me with some numbers. They've been working on this for a couple of days, and this is what they're able to come up with. We have approximately 12,000 registered voters. It's a hair under that, 11,980 something. So call it 12,000 registered voters. The law requires that if we adopt this, that the information that's prepared be sent to each household in which there is a registered voter. So the town clerk, the way their records are maintained, they don't necessarily know of those 12,000 registered voters, how many of them are in a household or head of household. So when they look at the numbers, they estimated approximately 6,500 to 6,600 of the 12,000 were heads of household. But not every registered voter of the 12,000 is a head of household. So we can't just go with the 6,500 because you may be leaving out voters that may not be the head of household. They could be registered in the house, but they're not showing up on our census as the head of household. For an example, an 18-year-old that registers to vote isn't the head of a household if there is a parent in the house. So if the parent wasn't registered to vote and the child was, they wouldn't get the information. So the clerk said the best way, and probably the only way, to ensure that every household received this in accordance with the law, other than going through all the files and actually weeding out and trying to figure this out. She said at best guesstimate right now anyway would be to use approximately 7,600 households in town. And just assume if you mail to every one of those, you're not going to miss somebody if they're a registered voter. So use the number about 7,500. So again, to go back to Attorney Hennigan's comment, that number would fluctuate depending on how many questions there are, how many pages are in the mailing, and how that mailing was put together and the weight of it. So you can estimate that at a minimum, it's probably $3,700 per mailing, and at a maximum, it's probably $5,000 at a mailing. But again, this is just really preliminary estimates. I asked the clerk not to go any further with that because you had just asked us for some estimates. So just beware, these are not specific numbers. She can't do that without going through the entire database and pulling out who's actually registered and where they live. And I think that might have been the only things that you would ask me to get.
Mr. Berthium?
So basically, the issues that I have, and I totally respect Mr. LaLiberty wanting to get as much information to everybody. And I did talk to people at that particular election, and I too had family members that voted, and we determined that they didn't vote the way they thought they were going to vote. So there definitely was a lot of confusion with that, and it's a crying shame that people write questions that are that confusing. However, you know, I don't feel that, you know, I don't think it's going to increase the amount of people that come out and vote by that much. I think it's a big expense to the town to get that information out. I also am very, very concerned that no matter how middle of the road you try to put something with us as a board or our council trying to go middle of the road, I just always kind of feel like we're going to get accused of, well, we tried to push voters this way, or we tried to push voters that way. And I don't think, I have complete confidence in our council, and I have complete confidence in our board, but it's just the nature of our society now that everyone wants to just kind of like push things one way or another, or twist things, or, and so for that reason, as much as, you know, with this last state election with the nurses, I mean, right up until the final day, I was trying to ask doctors, ask nurses, ask anybody, you know, why? Why do you, how do you vote, and why do you want to vote that way? And I think that, you know, it's your duty as it's your privilege as a voter to vote. It's your duty as a voter to do your due diligence to get the best information you can in order to do that vote. So unfortunately, I don't see that it's in the town's best interest to adopt something like this.
Anyone else? Mr. Carpenter?
Well, I'm on the fence, and I can be pushed either way, so. I agree with Mr. Berthium to some extent, and I agree that it is going to be a great expense. But conversely, every time the state does do a ballot question, the Secretary of State spends endless amounts of money and endless amounts of paper to tell the public exactly what it is. So while we can say it's our due diligence, now, you mentioned the nursing question. I can tell you that on GBH radio, they had both sides, and it was on for an hour, and then they had it on TV for another hour. And I got a lot out of it. But does everybody have the opportunity to do that? No. Does everybody? And I think there is an obligation on government's part, and you're right. I agree. No matter what we do, and I've said this to people, and Mrs. Goodrich can attest, you do what you think is right, because no matter what you do, people are going to criticize you one way or the other. It doesn't matter what you do. If you say yes to this, some people will say you're wasting money. If you say no to it, some people say you are trying to bias it by denying them the information. So you can't worry about public opinion when it comes to making decisions, because all you can do is make the best decision, and that's all any of us do up here, is try and make the best decision based on the information we have. I am concerned also that we can't use electronic mail, which the clerk does have, which would reduce the cost of this, and, you know, that is something that would be nice if we could ask the legislature to maybe make a friendly amendment. The other thing that I don't see, and I know that with public records requests, we don't get a lot of requests as a board. I can't, in the 20-plus years, well, maybe more than that, 25 years I've been voting, I think we've had maybe 3 questions. But just like with public records requests, people can use them as a nuisance, as a form of harassment to government or government officials. I would have liked to have seen something in here like the new public records law that says you can't just, every time the thought crosses your mind that you're going to, start asking the Board of Selectmen to have a ballot question and then trigger. So I have concerns about that the law does not address. And granted that maybe one or two people in my time have misused the public records law that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are more than I know of, but I don't want this to become a form of retribution against people because they don't like a decision somebody made, or, so I do have that concern with the chapter. Having said that, I would support adopting it and would support looking into it and asking our delegation if we can't make some improvements so that we can reduce the cost, that we can protect the communities from someone misusing what is a very good and helpful process to the voters.
Did you want to speak or you want to go first?
It's been looked into, there are sides to both of them, and I'm not quite sure that I'm ready to go along with something with this. If we accept this, then it's on till we say, no, we're not going to, then we have to not accept it any longer and turn it around. I think it'll be costly. I think it'll be time-consuming. I think that, and as Mr. Berthium had noted, it's a sign of the times. It's interpretation, and interpretation will kill you. Depending upon who writes the yes, who writes the no, who writes the pro, the con, it's a tough thing to look at, and I don't think this town is ready for something like that. I think that the due diligence by the voter is the way we should be going. Social media is out there. It gives us all the information that we need. If there's questions on the ballot, most times, more often than not, it's on the media, or on the TV, the radio, and it will be discussed. And I think people should draw their conclusions from that, and after they find out what information there is out there, it's up to them to look into it further and see which I like or I don't like. And so I think that the town as itself should stay away from something like that. I think it could get us into a problem down the road with interpretation, and that's my feeling, so I can't support this.
Did you want to say something? I know you waited for 3 hours. Do you want to say something before we take a vote?
Yeah, thank you.
Name and address for the record, please.
Sarah Libby, 9 Sherman Ave. I apologize ahead of time for looking down at my phone. My notes are at my phone. A couple things I wanted to clear up. This came from me, not from Tristan. He put it on the table because I asked him to, mostly because I didn't really know how the process worked and fear of public speaking. But here I am. I would ask again that you please adopt this measure that would allow the town to send notifications to eligible voter residents stating when town elections are and what questions on the ballot. Voter turnout for town elections in Auburn is horrendously low, 9.25% in 2017 and 12.78% in 2018. Yes, the town clerk does what she can to notify residents about the election. The sign outside the firehouse gets updated and the date and ballot gets posted to Facebook. But considering the low turnout over the last few years, it's obviously not enough. For the firehouse, I mean, I live in Precinct 5. There's a grocery store there. There's a gas station there. There's on-ramps to all the highways there. I could go years without driving by the firehouse. Not to mention the sign is just not big enough to hold all the information other than the date of the election. Facebook is a great tool, but we know that not everyone is on Facebook. We know that the people who are, not everyone who is on Facebook follows the town of Auburn. And we know that Facebook algorithms are bad. They don't work, they're unreliable, and there's no way to guarantee that the people who even do follow the town see what the town posts. It's just not possible. I have, as far as whether the town is ready, I have collected 38 signatures over the last week for people who are in support of it. I can get more. This was just a couple hours outside of Shaw's. And obviously, I'm not the only one who feels this way. Mr. Rafferty brought it up a couple weeks ago. We didn't coordinate that. He just happened to also have the same concern as me. And as evidenced by the most recent midterm elections, most people only vote when they feel like something in their lives is at stake. Well, they can't feel that way if they don't know what's going on. And it's by providing that information, I feel that is absolutely worth the time and worth the money to make people aware. A 13% turnout, not even 13%, isn't a representative democracy, in my opinion. And as Tristan brought up before the last couple town elections, I did speak with several other people in my town, neighbors, people at the hair salon, who didn't know there was an election coming because it's not really advertised, and didn't know what was on the ballot, and also didn't understand the question, which is a different topic. By informing voters, you will guarantee a higher turnout and making it a more representative democracy and representative of what our town actually wants. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for waiting the 3 hours. And I'm just going to comment on a couple. I too am concerned with voter turnout. Voter turnout is low. I believe when there is a ballot question on, especially if it hits someone's pocketbook, we will have much higher turnout. There's, to me, a big difference of getting information out there on an election when the election is early voting, there are questions on the ballot, and actually us being responsible for writing a summary for it. I mentioned it at the last meeting that we could potentially have, although we haven't had many, we could potentially have quite a few ballot questions coming up, including and not limited to the plastic bag ban, a swimming pool, a public safety complex, and potentially there's always questions for the schools. My concern is that if we have town council writing these summaries, or we have certain individuals providing these summaries, there'll be a cloud, a shadow over the results. If there's support or opposition for an issue, I want it to be clean. I don't want it to be said that, you can write the most objective, straightforward summary, and somebody will believe that it was skewed in a certain direction. I agree with you, we need to do better at getting information out there for voter turnout. It's terrible, it's disappointing. Not us, but every elected board, every commission makes a difference in your daily life, your quality of life, and we get 13% voter turnout. And at the federal election, not that that doesn't make a difference, but we get 80%. I just don't get the disconnect, and I agree with you. We can do better, and we maybe should work on that. Subcommittees through the town clerk's office, I'm not really sure, but I'm not ready to adopt this policy. And if we don't adopt it tonight, that doesn't mean it can't be brought up at a future date. So we have the motion. Did you make the motion?
I haven't made the motion.
You haven't made the motion. Do you want to make the motion?
I
thought we... No? Okay.
No. I'll make a motion that we vote to accept Section 18B of Chapter 53 to allow town-sponsored mailings, regardless of ballot questions.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Doesn't say you can't bring it back. And thank you again for waiting.
Can I just add an ending comment on it?
Yes.
I probably will bring this back in the future because I do think it's important. But I also think that the board shouldn't end looking into ways of increasing voter turnout. Like Sarah mentioned, I didn't even have this idea at all. This was on her. But I think this is something that we should look into, and I also want to thank Sarah for bringing this to our attention.
Absolutely. We don't appoint all the committees, but certainly a subcommittee through the town's clerk's office sounds like a great idea. So thanks for coming forward. Mr. Berthium.
I also wanted to thank Sarah for doing that, and I definitely am frustrated with the turnout, and would be happy to try to help out in any way as far as coming up with ideas to try to, get more people to show up. Not necessarily to have an opinion one way or another, but to get people to show up. It definitely is low in this town. I feel like way too low in this town. And I, like Mr. Carpenter said, I don't know how or if we could do it to try to find a way to appeal, whether it's, through state reps or through Senator Mike Moore, but to see how we could get information to be more electronic. I think that's would be a huge step in getting the word out and saving money for the town.
Well, the new session starts in January, so now would be the time to request that they file a bill. So we can talk about that as well. Anything else on this item? Okay. Item 4A and 5A are tied together. Could I have a motion to take them together?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So in your packet, you have a letter from the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulations. As you recall, we received a similar letter a few months back talking about the auto dealerships being in compliance with the Lemon Law requirements. And one of the dealers has now failed twice with compliance. I'll remind members that we are due to renew all of the licenses at the end of the year. Generally, we renew if there are no issues with the outstanding license. So I put this on as a potential discussion and vote in case members wanted to either send a letter or invite in the holder of that license where they've failed twice. And I'll leave that up to the board for discussion. Otherwise, we just automatically renew it at the end of the year. Mr. Berthium.
I see that we have a 78% on one of them, 100% on the other.
They were the two who failed originally?
Right. Was the number on the 78% around that the first time, or was it quite a bit
No, they came
lower?
up, but they...
They came up, but they haven't.
Right. I still feel you should, if you've gotten a warning from the state, you should be in full compliance. But it's up to board members that we can let it go, and they will be automatically renewed when we take up the licenses in December. Mr. Carpenter?
Last time we did it, we didn't know what their sample was, and we sent letters to everybody, which I don't believe that you condemn the others, because two that we know of, I mean, I know if I were in business and I was at 100% and I got a letter from the Board of Selectmen telling me, by the way, you are required, it's not going to set the right tone for the business community. If I would have voted differently had we addressed it to the two people or the two organizations that had failed. I'm happy to send a letter to them, and if people want them to come in, I don't see what they have failed twice. I think that's more concerning to me than the first time, because again, we don't know how many they've really even looked at. And they're only giving us two names, so that bothers me. They also tell us from our friends at the state that they are the enforcing authority, not us. So while we are the license holder, or the license authority, they are the ones that are supposed to enforce the law. So that is not our charge, but I'm happy to send these two a note suggesting that, we have, this is strike 2.
Well, one of them was in 100% compliance, so only one of them had 2 strikes.
Well, this letter is very confusing.
So the last letter indicated, the first letter we received indicated that they had done an audit of all the dealerships in Auburn, and 2 were not in compliance. So they did come through and conduct an audit on all dealerships. They followed up on the 2 that were not in compliance, and of the 2 that were not in compliance, 1 is still not in compliance. But they did do an audit on all dealerships in the town of Auburn.
Okay, they should put that in a letter.
Well, it was in the first letter, I guess.
It wasn't in the first letter, because
Okay.
I asked the question at the
Okay.
time what the sample was, and nobody knew. So to me, sending it out to 28 people, wasting postage, wasting time to tell 25 people that, oh, by the way, this is a lemon law issue, which they're not even a party to. I mean, as we talk about spending money, that to me was I don't believe in group guilt, that we need to send it out to everybody. Send it out to the people who have demonstrated that they're unaware.
So do members want to take any action on the letter that we received, that we had a dealership that was not in compliance twice? If not, we move on. Mr. Berthium?
Through the chair, I mean, I kind of feel like we should address the one that did not get, especially where this is the second time around, that they didn't get the 100% compliance. Because, and I don't necessarily want to not renew their license. I mean, they're at 78%. I don't remember what the first percentage was. But I think they need to kind of know that if they don't, then they're definitely in jeopardy of this board considering not renewing their license next time. So I would make a motion that we send a letter to the one that's at 78% to say that, we do take this very seriously, and they certainly, if they can't become 100% compliant, that, they may be considered for a non-renewal next time around.
Is there a second?
Second.
So I just want to, just because you mentioned it, I want to be very clear. I wasn't saying I wasn't willing to renew their license. I just feel that I just want to notify them that we've been notified that they've failed twice. And
Yeah,
we're the licensing authority.
that's kind of what I was saying, too.
Is there any other discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So voted. Thank you. In your packet, you have the list of the annual liquor license renewals for 2019. They have been reviewed by the treasurer collector and DCG with no issues indicated. Comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to accept.
Second.
Do you want me to read the whole? Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the license renewals, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all the conditions stated upon it. Failure to comply with any and all conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void with the conditions of the DCG on the licenses.
And Mr. Holstrom seconded that.
Yes.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So voted. Under gift acceptance, in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53A, we have a gift to the Fire Rescue Department for their gift account from Ernest Prescott Jr. in the amount of $50, and from Guy Orcutt and Carol Jem, in the amount of $10, also to the Fire Department gift account. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept with gratitude?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So voted. We have no proclamations or recognitions. We have taken care of item 5E. Under 5F, discussion and potential vote on the December meeting schedule. Ms. Jacobson, could you get out your calendar just so we can be looking? I know that we have a December 10th meeting. And then,
Through the chair, the next meeting after the 10th, which will be the fourth Monday of the month, is Christmas Eve, December 24th. And then the 5th of the month is New Year's Eve, December 31st. It falls very unusual this year with the Monday nights.
Oh. I'll be at both.
I will not be here on Christmas Eve.
is there a motion?
Should we make a motion to go first and third instead of
We just scheduled a public hearing for the 2nd,
for
for December 10th, which is the 2nd.
Through the chair, if I can just make a suggestion and a comment. Last year, the board went with one meeting in December, but I believe we left it that if we needed another meeting, if we felt things were piling up, we would let you know. There would be the opportunity to have it on the 17th if we needed to have another meeting, if something came up that was urgent. Likewise, there's always the opportunity to have it between Christmas and New Year's for an emergency situation.
Right.
But last year, you did go with just the one in December. I don't recall how it fell last year, but it was, well, I believe the holiday actually was on a Monday last year. That's what happened.
Make a motion that we hold one meeting in December unless there is reason to have a meeting, and that it be on a date other than Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So voted. Ms. Jacobson, you have a couple items on the agenda. First
Thank you.
is the town hall
Yep.
greeters.
I just want to let you all know, I think I might have sent an email, but just to let the public know also, we are having a new pilot program this year for some of our senior tax work-off participants, and we are creating town hall greeters. And the intent is we need to find positions for some of our seniors to be able to work through the senior tax work-off program. And we want something that's of value, makes them feel valued, and adds value to the residents. So I had seen greeters at other town halls that I've gone to in the past and just did a little inquiring as to how they were there, how did they set the program up. And nobody that mentioned it to me that they did a senior tax work-off, but a number of them said they had residents that were looking to volunteer, so they thought it was a good use of their time. So we put the two together and figured, let's go with the senior tax work-off program to start. So we have 4 participants. Each one will be taking one day a week. We are sensitive to their schedules as well and understand that occasionally if there's bad weather, we don't want our seniors coming out in bad weather. There's plenty of time to do this. So over the course of a year, the seniors need to work 125 hours each. So as it is scheduled now, we will have 4 working Monday through Thursday from 10 to 2. We worked out the schedule with them, and I want to thank our Senior Center Director, Jean Boulette, for working with them on this. Originally, we were thinking we would have some come in 10 to 12, then some 12 to 2, and they all decided that they would rather work a 4-hour shift once a week, which makes perfect sense. So we have a different person every day of the week from 10 to 2. We chose those hours because not that town hall is not busy a lot of the time, it's busy most of the time, but I think there's a good influx of people coming in a little bit before lunch hours, a little bit after lunch hours. They move schedules around so they can be here then. So we're just trying to catch the time of day that people are coming in. So you'll see a senior, our work-off program, downstairs. We set up a table near the Veteran Services Division, and the intent is as people come in the door, first of all, just make people feel happy to be here. Just, greet them. Welcome to Town Hall. Can we help you? Is there anything you're looking for? Is there anyone we can help guide you to? A lot of people do come into our offices and stop at one of the offices on the first floor of Town Hall and really don't know where they're supposed to go. So we've prepared information for each of the greeters. It's going to take a little bit because it's new to them also, but we have a map of town hall so they know where to send people. We also came up with some commonly asked questions and where they may send them, and a spreadsheet that actually shows each department, who is in each department, what extension they're at, what office number they're at, and what types of things they handle. So if someone comes in and says, I'm looking for a building permit, the senior can look at it and say, oh, that would be on the second floor at DDIS. Or I'm looking for an animal license. Oh, that's our clerk's office on the first floor. So just common things like that. So we are giving them each notebooks and saying, because you're new at it and this is new to us, let us know, write down any questions. If you're getting consistent questions on something and we don't know where to direct you, let us know and we'll figure it out. So we're excited. The program started today. I wanted to just mention it to you so you can welcome the seniors as they're welcoming residents here to the town hall.
Thank you. And your next item?
Second one, just an announcement. I believe Ed might have brought this up at the last meeting, but just a reminder that our budget kickoff meeting for FY20 is this coming Wednesday night at 7 p.m. In this room with the Finance Committee. And then just one more reminder, the annual tree lighting is this coming Friday evening, November 30th at 6 p.m. at the fire station headquarters on Auburn Street. And we have Santa, as always, our special guest of honor, as well as we have Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and an invocation. We have a lot of different groups. We have the high school band, which is wonderful. And a lot of people in the community have offered to help out. We have, as usual, cookies from Bay Path, and we'll be serving hot cocoa for the children and the parents, and coffee. So, right now, looks like a good forecast. We're not looking at anything treacherous as far as weather, so we look forward to seeing everyone and seeing Santa again.
Thank you. And I believe the tabled items are still tabled. We're just waiting for some...
They should be ready for us for our next meeting.
Great. Do members have anything? No? No additional public comment? We have no minutes. I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of
Aye.
adjourning? We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night.